Chapter 350. When such an important person returned to Jianing, it would definitely be a sensational event. Outside Jianing Prefecture, Magistrate Li Daotong was waiting in line with a group of officials. Yang Qindong's impression of Li Daotong was not bad. It was precisely because of this that he gave him face and personally got off the carriage. After exchanging greetings for a while, Yang Qindong used the excuse of being tired from the journey to politely decline the other party's offer to give him a welcome dinner. The group of horses went straight into the Yang residence. The Yang residence became lively because of Yang Qindong's arrival. The old housekeeper Yang Hai was busy in front and behind the house. This would be the place for him to retire. Taking advantage of the fact that the fourth young master and the sixth young master were both here, there were many things that he needed to buy. After the fourth young master, Yang Qindong, arrived at Jianing Prefecture, he first worshipped the ancestral temple with his sixth brother. Then, out of boredom, he wandered around the various restaurants and even the brothels. With the title of the Duke of Loyalty, it was much more convenient for him to do anything. In contrast, after Ban Qindong arrived at the Yang residence, he quieted down and rarely went out on the streets. However, this didn't mean that he was completely unaware of what was happening outside. On the contrary, many things were under his control. For example, the report from the Security Bureau on his desk clearly recorded what had just happened in the capital. As the representative of Emperor Yingzong, Yang Shan came to Baiming's capital. However, to everyone's surprise, he didn't have the slightest intention of criticizing the acting Emperor Zhu Qiyu. On the contrary, he said that he came to express friendship and acknowledge the legitimacy of the acting emperor of Baiming. When this matter came out, naturally, the entire court was shocked. The acting emperor Zhu Qiyu was overjoyed and personally invited Yang Shan to a banquet to express his goodwill. At the banquet, Yang Shan even took out a document with his seal as the representative of Yingzong. When he solemnly handed over the letter of credence, he said that no matter if it was Southern Ming or Baiming, they were all one family. Now that the southern part of the Southern Ming Empire was in chaos, they still needed the help of their brothers. Thus, they took the opportunity to ask for the help of the Duke of Loyalty, Yang Qindong. After receiving Nanming's approval, Zhu Qiyu was overjoyed. The other party had only made a small request, so how could he refuse? As such, the matter of Yang Qindong working for the Southern Ming Empire was set in stone. After doing all this, Yang Shan used the excuse that Emperor Yingzong was waiting for news as an excuse to leave. After a night's rest, they left the city early the next morning. No one knew where Yang Qindong had gone. Only the patrolling soldiers saw traces of a group of carriages being robbed. They also found a document with the seal of the acting emperor, Zhu Qiyu. The document stated that Yang Qindong could contribute to the Southern Ming Empire. How could Yang Shan disappear? All of this was naturally Yang Qindong's handiwork. Not only did Yang Shan disappear, even his family members in the Southern Ming Empire's capital had disappeared. In Yingzong, Zhu Qizhen received news that Yang Shan had actually represented him in acknowledging the legitimacy of Baiming's existence. He was so angry that he flipped over the dragon table. Soon after, the embroidered uniform guards left the palace and came to the Yang residence to capture the criminals. Unfortunately, there were indeed people in the Yang residence. However, they were only actors who had come to put on a show a few days ago. They were all tied up in the courtyard and hadn't eaten for 3 days. At this moment, the embroidered uniform guards found out that the Yang family members had already escaped. The embroidered uniform guards who were in charge of leading the team reported this matter to Commander Mengda, who knew Yingzong's fate, was afraid that he would be implicated. Thus, he killed all the actors and lied to the higher-ups that Yang Shan's family members had resisted arrest and were all killed. That was how things had happened. The main person who had put in the effort was Su Yozhen. He had done everything step by step after receiving Yang Qindong's secret letter. For example, he had taken the lead in persuading Yang Shan. Since Yang Shan was disheartened and Su Yozhen could guarantee the safety of his family members, he simply threw caution to the wind and followed the plan to represent Yingzong to acknowledge the existence of Nanming. Thus, he was able to leave with his life intact. At this moment, he was being arranged by the Security Bureau to meet up with his family in Qiqian City. Yang Shan was a capable person. However, because he had a bottom line in his heart, He wasn't willing to wallow in the mire with some people. This kind of capable minister was what Yang Xie needed. This time Lu De wanted to push him aside. However, he had forcefully delivered this person into his hands. He didn't know how angry and pained Lu De would be after knowing the truth. Putting this information to the side, Yang Qindong slowly leaned back on the wooden chair. It had been more than 20 days since he last saw Kuang Yi in Hangzhou residence. Counting the days, he should be here soon. However, he didn't know what kind of status he would be given this time. Just as Yang Qindong thought, Kuang Yi had already arrived outside Jianing residence that night. After a good night's rest, he brought a group of followers into the city early the next morning. Magistrate Li Daotong, who had received the news first, brought his men and stood there respectfully. At the same time, he was shocked by what had just happened. He had received the news last night that Kuang Yi, the Minister of War, was going to enter Jianing residence to discuss important matters with the Duke of Loyalty. Therefore, he had sent someone to the Yang residence the next morning to invite Yang Qindong to personally go out of the city with him to welcome Minister Kuang. The people were sent out, but they quickly rushed back and brought back news that shocked the prefectural magistrate. It was Yang Qindong who said that he would be waiting in the Yang residence. Heavens, this was a minister. After the imperial court removed the cabinet, he was the most powerful group of people. However, the Duke of Loyalty still didn't seem to take him seriously. What on earth was he relying on? Li Daotong cautiously and nervously saw Kuang Yi, the Minister of War, who had rushed over, looking travel-worn. "Where is the Duke of Loyalty?" Kuang Yi asked when he saw the people who had come to welcome him. His eyes were filled with anxiety. Li Daotong's heart was beating like a drum when he heard this. Look, she's blaming me now. He had wanted to make up a random lie, such as that the Duke of Loyalty was on his way. However, he didn't have the courage to lie in the face of the old and mighty Minister of War. He immediately told the truth. Minister Kuang, the Duke of Loyalty said that he was waiting in the Yang residence. After saying these words, Li Daotong felt as if all the strength in his body had been drained at this moment. Then, he was ready to bear the wrath of thunder. However, Kuang Yi didn't seem angry at all after hearing the news. Instead, he said, "Since that's the case, you don't have to accompany me. Go do your own things. Guaning, let's go directly to the Yang residence." Kuang Yi wasn't angry. Li Daotong was shocked and understood the importance of the Duke of Loyalty. He hurriedly led the way towards the Yang family's old residence in the city. Although Yang Qindong didn't personally come out to welcome them, the Yang residents had already made arrangements. They had even sent his fourth brother, Yang, to personally welcome them 3 streets away. Kuang Ye's expression was much better after seeing this. It would be impossible to say that he didn't care that Yang Qindong didn't come out to greet him. However, considering that Yang Qindong was a duke and had saved his life, he didn't need to be too calculative about etiquette. Seeing Yang 3 streets away, Kuang Yi knew that Yang Qindong was in the ancestral hall of the Yang family's old residence. After entering the Yang family's residence, Kuang Yi dismissed everyone, leaving only Yang to lead the way. Upon entering the ancestral hall, he saw Yang Qindong, who had changed into a white robe, kneeling on a praying mat. Directly above him was a memorial tablet with Yang Rong's name written on it. When Kuang Yi saw the memorial tablet, he immediately cupped his fists and bowed 3 times. At this time, Yang Qindong had already turned around. "Minister Cheng has come to visit my father. If the underworld knows, it will be gratified. Young Master Yang is also someone this old master admires. Since we've met today, I must pay my respects," Kuang Yi said with a calm expression. "Speaking of which, Minister Cheng is the first minister to come here to pay respects to my father. All right, wait for me to tidy up. I will have to trouble Minister Cheng to wait in the front hall." Yang Qindong's lips curved into a smile. Yang Qindong turned around and left, leaving Kuang Yi standing there with a thoughtful expression on his face. He was the first minister to come here. Was he hinting at something? Yang Qindong was obviously hinting at something. Thinking of his father, Yang Rong, who was one of the 3 great families, how glorious he was when he was alive. But in the end he died on the way home. After entering the Yang residence's ancestral hall, no one came to pay their respects. This was the way of the world. The tea cools down after the person is gone. This was not the cold-blooded scene Yang Chendong wanted to see. Since he had contributed to the country, he should be honored by the country at all times. Just like the hero's monument erected in Qiqian City, it was a way to commemorate those who had contributed to the country. In the future, he would also build a large cemetery. Not only the Yang family, but also those who had contributed greatly to the country could be buried there and enjoy the worship of their descendants. Of course, there was another reason why Yang Chendong chose to meet in the ancestral hall. He wanted to see Kuang Ye's attitude towards his father. If Kuang Ye only cupped his fists in a perfunctory manner, then it would be difficult to befriend someone who did not care about old ties. In that case, he would have to keep his bottom line when interacting with Kuang Ye in the future. From the looks of it, Kuang Ye's performance was not bad. Yang Chendong could not help but want to recruit him. Of course, this so-called intention to recruit was just a thought. Kuang Ye was already very old, and his thinking was somewhat old-fashioned. It would not be easy to convince him. Furthermore, he had served the great Ming Empire for his entire life. His heart might not be able to change in such a short time. Since that was the case, it was better to let him be a loyal minister. If there was a chance, he would make sure that Kuang Ye did not die. Chapter 351. Kuang Ye naturally could not think of so many things. He was also unable to detect the strong desire in Yang Chendong's heart. After hearing the words just now, he could only sigh at the hypocrisy of the world, and then went to the front hall. Today he was here on the emperor's orders to invite Yang Chendong to send troops. After all, the chaos in the south was getting bigger and bigger. If it was not stopped, it could affect the political situation of the southern Ming dynasty. Yang Chendong, who had just changed into a green robe in the front hall, also walked in. Haha, I'm sorry to have kept Minister Kuang waiting. Is there any good news from the emperor? Haha, the loyal duke's guess is right. The emperor spent a lot of effort to invite you. This time he even put in enough capital. He even acknowledged the legitimacy of the northern Ming dynasty. Only then did he get you, a great general, to come out. Don't let down the emperor's good intentions. Kuang Ye's face was smiling, but in fact his heart was bleeding. He had seen Zhu Qijian's appearance when he was angry. It was true that when a dragon was angry, corpses could be strewn across 1,000 miles. Fortunately, paying such a huge price did not mean that there was no reward. Yang Chendong was able to lead troops and received the emperor's approval. This could be considered as an explanation. This time, Yang Shan's actions had made Ing Zong very angry. If he could catch him, he would probably kill all 9 generations of his family. However, the matter had already been done. Now he could only hope that Yang Chendong could do his best to recover some of the losses. Yang Chendong naturally pretended to be flattered. He smiled and said with a serious face, "Receiving the emperor's kindness, Chendong will naturally be willing to sacrifice my life to repay the emperor's kindness. It's just that the request made by our country's mercenaries, I wonder if your majesty will." He will. Seeing that Yang Chendong didn't intend to go back on his word, Kuang Ye hurriedly said, "The emperor empathizes with the mercenaries' efforts, so this time he is especially generous. He allows you to obtain what you need by attacking your opponents in the process of suppressing the bandits. However, please do a tally of what you have obtained and report it to me." Not only that, His Majesty also specially appointed Duke Zhongdan as His Majesty's imperial envoy, so he could take advantage of His Majesty's actions. In addition, there are 5,600 soldiers in the Guangdong Guard Institute near Guangdong, 2,600 soldiers in the Guangzhou Prefecture, 1,000 soldiers in the Shaozhou Prefecture, and 1,000 soldiers in the Pingel Prefecture. In total, there are more than 10,000 soldiers who can be deployed by the imperial envoy. The nearby Great Ming Prefecture will also arrange for the army's provisions. Kuang Ye seemed to be worried that Yang Chendong would go back on his word. He hurriedly took out his trump cards one by one. It seemed like he was being honest, but if one listened carefully, it seemed like there was nothing practical other than 10,000 soldiers. It was just like the problem of rations. Since they were fighting for the southern Ming Empire, why would they need to prepare their own rations? As the saying goes, an emperor doesn't lack hungry soldiers. There was also the position of imperial envoy, which was a temporary position. When you were used, you would naturally have a lot of power, but what if you were no longer needed? You would immediately be beaten back to your original state. In this aspect, Ingzong's actions were far inferior to Daizong's. At the very least, Daizong had given him the position of Duke Zhongdan. Kuang Yi said it in a dignified manner, but in reality he didn't have to pay much. He even had to rely on himself to rob the bandits for military expenses. If it were any other general, they would definitely shake their heads at such conditions. However, Yang Chendong had already considered everything and even planned it out. Most importantly, he needed resources and people, and he also needed a higher reputation. This could be said to be taking what each of them needed. Since that was the case, how could he refuse? Even if he didn't have these things, he would still take action. All right. Seeing that Kuang Yi had finished speaking and his mouth was dry, Yang Chendong laughed and slapped the table, saying, "This matter is decided. Thank you, Minister Chung, for your mediation. Since I am a loyal and courageous count, I will naturally do my best to help the emperor resolve his worries to the greatest extent." Yang Chendong's promise made Kuang Yi excited. Good, with the Duke Zhongdan's help, there is naturally nothing to worry about. However, how many soldiers will the mercenaries send? Kuang Yi smiled like an old fox. His smile seemed calm, but in reality his eyes were like swords. This was probably the problem he was most concerned about. Haha. Yang Chendong didn't immediately reply. Instead, he grinned and picked up the hot tea on the table, asking, "Minister Chung, you must be very familiar with the situation of the mercenaries. Just like in the Battle of Tumu, I only had 100 people with me, but I still saved everyone from the battlefield. Also, when the Walla approached Baiming's capital, does Minister know how many soldiers they sent?" Kuang Yi lowered his head and began to think. "I heard that there weren't many soldiers." "That's right, there weren't many. In the end, there were only 400 people. Yang Chendong raised 4 fingers and said proudly, "With only 400 people, I dared to tell the hundreds of thousands of Walla's elites not to attack Baiming and to turn north. Then how many mercenaries do you think are needed to deal with a group of bandits without any support?" This seemed to be a rhetorical question, but it showed Yang Chendong's confidence. At this moment he had a smile on his face, the corners of his mouth slightly raised, showing an expression of a strategist. "Oh, only 400? When Kuang Yi heard this, he was already shocked. Although the Southern Ming Empire naturally had a certain number of intelligence agents in Baiming, and the information they sent back said that there were only 400 mercenaries, this information wasn't accepted by everyone. Based on their understanding, they believed that it was impossible to turn the situation around with just 400 mercenaries. This should just be a smokescreen by the Northern Ming Empire. The reason why the number of mercenaries was so small was just to highlight the strength of the Northern Ming Empire's army. But now that these words came from Yang Chendong's mouth, the meaning was completely different. There was no need for him to lie, at least at this time. Otherwise, the moment he was exposed, he wouldn't be able to get out of this embarrassing situation. It was no wonder that Kuang Yi was so shocked. "Of course it's true." Yang Chendong nodded seriously and said as if he was reminiscing. Back then, in order to hire these 400 mercenaries, Daizong paid a total of 10 million taels of silver. Thinking about it makes one's heart ache. Fortunately, the war was won in the end and the country stabilized. Everything was worth it. When he mentioned the price of 10 million taels of silver, Kuang Ye's eyes suddenly blinked, clearly shocked. When he saw Yang Chendong staring at him, he quickly revealed a bitter smile. "Duke Zhongdan, Ingzong just established himself in Nanjing, and the treasury is empty. We really don't have that much money to give you. This duke knows." Yang Chendong raised his right hand and stopped Kuang Ye's words. "It is precisely because this duke knows this that I didn't ask for an exorbitant price. To be honest, as a citizen of the Great Ming Dynasty, this duke's everything was given to me by the emperor. Now that I need an official, of course I have to step forward. Not only that, this duke has also discussed with the leader of the mercenaries. In order to completely solve the problem of the bandits in the south, the mercenaries are willing to send 3,000 soldiers. This is definitely a big deal." 3,000? Good. Kwang Yi was originally listening very seriously, but the moment he heard the number 3,000, he instantly became excited. Of course, this was also because Yang Chendong had done a good job in setting the stage. Think about it, to chase away Walla's army of more than 100,000, they only used 400 people. Although Baiming's army also contributed, without those 400 people, Baiming's old soldiers wouldn't have been able to achieve victory. In comparison, the 3,000 mercenaries this time was 7 times more than the previous time. Thus, how could Kwang Yi not be excited? No wonder he said the word good twice. With this foundation, the rest of the conversation became much easier. During this time, Kwang Yi also took out the imperial sword that Ng Zongjiang had given him. He said that as an imperial envoy, he had the power to make decisions on the spot. If any of the southern Ming officials were disobedient, he could use this sword to kill them and not be punished. He also said that Guaning had admired the Duke of Zhongdan for a long time, and greatly respected the war god. Could he use this opportunity to learn from him? Of course, with this person here, it would be easier to mobilize the nearby Ming soldiers. Yang Chendong rubbed the long sword in his hand. He had seen many imperial swords appear in movies in the future. Every time this item was taken out, it seemed to flash with a golden light. Now he could finally hold it in his hand. Of course, the moment he held it in his hand, he realized that the sword was very ordinary. It was just a bit more flashy than a normal sword. In the end, it was just a symbol. After hearing that Guaning was going to follow him, Yang Chendong's first thought was that Kwang Yi was monitoring him. But when he thought about it, this was normal. After all, if there were no people from the military by his side, it was inevitable that he would run into trouble. Furthermore, even if he refused Guaning, there would probably be other people who would appear by his side for various reasons. Since this was the case, it was better to agree early and get it over with. At least he could let Kwang Yi owe him a favor. Guaning is Minister Cheng's favorite general. He should be someone with some ability. Since this is the case, he can just follow. However, I ask Minister Cheng to tell him that as long as he follows me, he only needs to listen to my orders. I don't need him to give any opinions. Haha, speaking of which, even if he gives an opinion, I may not listen. This point needs to be made clear first. Otherwise, if you lose the battle, don't blame it on me. Chapter 352. Yang Chendong's agreement allowed Kwang Ye's heart to relax. He was very clear in his heart that even if Yang Chendong rejected him now, there was nothing he could do. After all, it was Ng Zong's idea to ask him to send troops. In order to achieve this goal, the Southern Ming Empire had paid a great price. If there was a problem because of one person, he would be guilty. As such, when Yang Chendong said that he would not allow Guaning to interfere with his military decisions, there was no reason for him to refuse. Duke of Loyalty, please rest assured. Guaning will follow you to solve some problems and learn from you. He will definitely not interfere. With Kwang Ye's assurance, a satisfied expression appeared on Yang Chendong's face. That's good, that's good. Then, when will the Duke of Loyalty decide to dispatch troops? The chaos in Guangdong is getting bigger and bigger, and there are signs of attacking the Guangzhou prefecture. Zhu Huihua has the help of the Miao soldiers, and now that Jiaoji is sending troops, the Southern Ming Empire does not have the energy to send troops to suppress the bandits. When Kwang Yi spoke of the war, he could not help but become anxious. With war everywhere, it was hard for him to be the minister of war. There is no need to rush this. The leader of the mercenary army has been waiting for my reply. Now that I have Minister Kwang's reply, I can naturally reply to him. I believe that it will take at most half a month for their army to arrive. Yang Chendong chuckled, a playful look in his eyes. It was not that he was not anxious, but that Kwang Ye's news was too slow. He could only wait. This was the disadvantage of not having good communication. Yang Chendong's trip to Baiming's capital and persuading the Daizong Emperor to allow Yang Chendong to lead the troops took more than 20 days. By the time it reached Yang Chendong's ears, it was already close to a month. If this was a modern battlefield, the dust would have settled in a month's time, and the outcome would have been unchangeable. Hearing that he still needed to send a message to the mercenaries, although Kwang Yi was anxious, he didn't show it on his face. Instead, he nodded as if he understood. Yes, yes, the Duke of Loyalty is right. Since that's the case, please urge them more. After all, the situation at the front is urgent. That is natural. Since this Duke has accepted the Emperor's decree, I know what is more important and what is more important. Yang Chendong nodded as if he wanted Guang Yi to be at ease. Guang Yi finally left, leaving Guaning behind. From this moment on, this person was nominally Yang Chendong's subordinate. When Yang Chendong wanted to meet Guaning as a form of hospitality, he entered the courtyard where Guaning was supposed to be. However, he saw a different scene. A woman with an extremely graceful figure was sitting in the stone pavilion, looking at the pond in front of her as if she was thinking about something. Just by looking at her back, Yang Chendong couldn't help but think of a poem. More than 13 years of marriage, budding at the beginning of February. 10 miles of spring breeze on the road of Yangzhou, rolling up the beaded curtain is better than that. Yang Chendong also saw Hu Yan, Xiao Yin, Madame Shui, and Madame Xiang from the back. Although each of them had their own merits, especially Madame Shui's back was the most beautiful. However, compared to the woman in front of him, she seemed to be inferior. While he was in a daze, the sound of footsteps suddenly came from beside him. Then another woman's anxious voice with a hint of anger was heard. Who are you? Why are you here? The person's exclamation also startled the owner of the back figure to turn around. When she turned around, her clear and bright eyes, arched eyebrows, and long eyelashes trembled slightly. Her white and flawless skin had a touch of pink, and her thin lips were as delicate as rose petals. Her hair was clean, and her face was delicate and pretty. Her clear eyes and the fresh and natural aura emitted from her body formed a beautiful picture. The woman's face was completely revealed in front of Yang Chendong, and he felt like he was in a daze. At this moment, time seemed to have stopped. It was as if only the two of them existed in the world. Cough. Who are you? Please respect yourself and leave. While Yang Chendong was in a daze, the woman's voice sounded. Her voice was as pleasant as the song of an oriole, and Yang Chendong couldn't help but feel a little intoxicated. After all, he was a man who had seen much of the world. The shock quickly disappeared, and he returned to normal. He cupped his fists and said politely, I'm here to see Guaning, but I don't know where he went. Duke. Are you the Duke of Loyal and Daring? That woman seemed to be very intelligent. Just from this one sentence, she had guessed something and guessed Yang Chendong's identity. That's right. Yang Chendong nodded, and then looked at her curiously. I'm Su Maner. Greetings, Duke of Loyal and Daring. That's my maid Xiao Yin. Lord Guaning has gone to send Lord Zhao off. I think he'll be back soon. If Duke of Loyal and Daring has any matters, you can just wait for a while. The woman bowed and replied softly. Oh, you're Su Maner, a very nice name. Yang Chendong replied with a smile, and then waved his hand. I'm just here to see how Minister Councillor Guan is staying. There's nothing important. Since he's not here, we'll talk about it later. I'm really sorry to disturb Mississippi. I'll take my leave now. After showing a sunny smile, Yang Chendong turned and left. Beta Persei, who was following beside him, almost bumped into him. Fortunately, he was trained and dodged instinctively. However, no matter how one looked at it, this action was a little awkward and funny. As if she had noticed this scene, the servant girl named Xiao Yin chuckled behind her. Yang Chendong happened to walk out of the courtyard at this moment. When he heard the laughter, he couldn't help but glare fiercely at Beta Persei, who was following beside him. At this moment, Yang Heir's head was lowered, and he had a submissive expression on his face. All right, go and investigate the background of this Su Maner and report it to me. Young master, shouldn't she be Guanying's wife? Beta Persei was stunned and looked as if he had guessed her identity. You're really becoming a pig if I say you're stupid. Didn't you hear what she called Guanying? Also, there's going to be a war soon. As a young general favored by Guang Yi, how could Guanying bring his family here? He shook his head in disappointment. Beta Persei was good at everything. He was skilled and loyal, but sometimes his brain was short-circuited. After following him for so long, he still hadn't learned his lesson. Sometimes, Yang Chendong couldn't help but be led astray. He was really a pig teammate. Oh. After receiving Yang Chendong's reminder and reprimand, Beta Persei nodded, then patted his chest and said, "Young master, don't worry. This matter will be handed over to Beta Persei. I'll definitely find out her identity very soon." "Go." Yang Chendong nodded, then hummed a tune as he walked towards his own backyard. After finishing his discussion with Kuang Yi, Yang Chendong returned to his garden study and began to draft a secret order, preparing to mobilize Lungfeng inland. Yang Chendong had already expected this to happen. Naturally, Suxian City had already received the order and began to gather the army. Just as he promised Kuang Yi, Lungfeng did indeed send 3,000 soldiers. To be specific, it was 2 regiments of Lungfeng. After a few years of development, the small number of soldiers was still one of Yangxie's drawbacks. But even if they took the path of elite soldiers, there were some things that couldn't be rushed. Fortunately, the number of soldiers was still increasing. Today, the original 2 regiments had been upgraded to 2 divisions. The Army Division commander was Lung Song, while the Navy Division commander was Gao Xiong. Each division had 2 regiments under them. Each regiment had 3 battalions and 1 company, a total of 1,000 soldiers. If that was the case, Lung Feng's regular army had around 4,000 soldiers. This time, they said they would send 3,000 soldiers. Of course, they couldn't all be the most elite and regular Lungfeng. There was also an auxiliary division. Compared to the Lungfeng regiment, the auxiliary division had more soldiers. It had 5 battalions, each with 300 soldiers. In addition, there was a reinforced battalion, 4 companies, and 1 company, a total of 2,000 soldiers. The Lungfeng Regiment was the 2nd regiment of the army, a total of 1,000 soldiers. Regiment Commander Luopu. Speaking of Luopu, he was also one of the first batch of Lungfeng members trained in the Yang clan's old mansion. The only difference was that his performance back then was mediocre. But in the past few years in Qiqian City, his individual performance was extremely outstanding. Especially a while ago, when they were ambushed by the first Shang Dynasty on Little Ryukyu Island, Luopu, who was the battalion commander, was in charge of guarding the place. But now he didn't have enough men under him. He only had 200 soldiers under him. But even so, he still made a beautiful counterattack. He still used the powerful firepower in his hands to suppress the enemy and capture more than 500 enemy soldiers. He did not let the enemy break through the defensive line and endanger the safety of the Yang faction's territory. This battle was extremely beautiful. Even when they summed up the experience, Lung Song and Gao Xiong felt ashamed and reported this matter to Yang Chendong. Later on, when the regiment was changed to a division, Lung Feng became the division commander of the 1st Division and the regiment commander of the 1st Regiment. Luopu then became the regiment commander of the 2nd Regiment. This time Luopu was the leader. It was also Yang Chendong's request. He wanted to see if this person was truly talented. If he was, he wouldn't hesitate to promote him. Luopu was the regiment commander. Kong Jia, son of Tsuxian City's paper factory manager, Kong En, was one of the 5 political instructors that Yang Chendong had his eyes on. Now he finally made a name for himself and became the political instructor of the 2nd Regiment. The 3 battalion commanders below him were Wu Sheng, Chen Bo, and Kong Chuanxin, as well as Ling Daqiang, the company commander directly under him. This was the upper echelon of the 2nd Regiment. Among them, there were people that Yang Chendong was familiar with. There were also people who had been selected to become members of the Lungfeng Regiment. He wanted to use this opportunity to meet all of them. Chapter 353. The regiment commander was called Lu Zhua, and the political commissar was Song Jia. They were people who joined Lungfeng later on, and it was said that they were all really capable. This time, they led 2,000 men to participate in the war, which was also a form of training. The so-called men were people who were prepared to take part in the test of Lungfeng. In terms of overall strength, they were naturally not as strong as Lungfeng who had passed the test. However, in terms of overall strength, they were not something a normal army could compare to. Even within these men, there were many hidden dragons and crouching tigers. Maybe in a short while, they would pass the test and become official members of Lungfeng. They sent out 3,000 men all of a sudden, which was close to half of the troops in Qiqian City. This was also the result of Yang Chendong's careful consideration. In the eyes of others, his mission seemed to be to deal with the chaos in Guangdong. However, only he knew that since he had already made a move, the bigger the better. If he did not obtain enough benefits, how could he stop? This was not his style. Speaking of the chaos in Guangdong, Yang Chendong picked up a piece of information from the desk. This was a detailed record of the situation in that area. The chaos in Guangdong referred to the peasant uprising that happened in Guangdong. Huang Xiaoyang from Guangdong Nanhai was imprisoned for a case. He led hundreds of prisoners to break out of prison and start an uprising. In the 14th year of Zhengtong, 1449, he led 100,000 men and 1,000 ships to attack Guangzhou. He was known as Shuman Heavenly King and changed his name to Dongyang. He gave his subordinates the titles of Duke, Marquis, Count, Grand Tutor, Admiral, Commander, etc. The uprising army attacked Guangzhou for 8 months. In the 3rd month of the following year, 1450, Imperial censor Yang Ximin took charge and forced the uprising army to slow down their attacks. In the 5th month, Admiral Dong Xing used the chance to move troops from Jiangxi and Guang to suppress. He used the wolf troops, Guangxi Dong soldiers, to enter Dazhou, killing and drowning 10,000 of them. Huang Xiao was raised by a stray arrow and sacrificed himself. The imperial army presented his head as a sacrifice and captured his father and eldest son. The remaining troops retreated to Daoyang Castle, using the terrain to fight the army. After they lost, they continued to fight along the ocean. In history, the Great Ming Dynasty was still united, and it was not split into the north and south. The chaos in Guangdong was slowly suppressed by the Great Ming Dynasty. But in this life, because of Yang Chendong's unexpected intervention, Zhu Qizhen did not become a captive, nor did he become the retired emperor. He was imprisoned in the Nangong Palace, and instead came to Nanjing to establish the Southern Ming Dynasty. This change further weakened the military strength of the Southern Ming Empire. With the rebellion of the king of Minzhuang, Zhu Huixin, and the unexpected invasion of the Jiaoji army, the situation in the southern land became very difficult. In order to solve this problem, Ingsek's Zhu Qizhen ordered the various prefectures' armies to suppress them. With no more pressure on his head, Huang Xiaoyang's second son, Huang Yuliang, took the opportunity to lead the 4 heavenly kings, Geng Jun, Sun Jianglong, Cui Hua, and Ru Honghai, and began to clean up the old subordinates and bewitch the people. In a short period of time, the troops grew larger and larger. They actually successively conquered Laizhou, Gaozhou, Xuanzhou, and Wuzhou. Now they were attacking Zhaoqing Prefecture, which greatly threatened the safety of Guangdong's capital, Guangzhou Prefecture. During this period of time, the Southern Ming Empire also sent out troops to encircle and suppress them. The most typical example was the Guanghai Guards that protected Guangdong. Although this seemingly powerful Guanghai Guard had 5,600 soldiers, Huang Yuliang's men had infiltrated them before the battle, and he had spent a large sum of money to bribe some of the high-ranking officials. As a result, at the start of the battle, their battle plans were frequently leaked, and they were ultimately defeated and scattered by the combined efforts of both inside and outside. The defeat of the Guanghai Guards fueled Huang Yuliang's ambition, and there were no stronger Ming Empire troops around to fight against him. They could only rely on the Qianhu Guards in the nearby prefectures to barely hold on. However, after the battle, they would be heavily surrounded, and in the end, they would be defeated. After all these, the situation in Guangdong became even more dangerous. Once the Guangzhou Prefecture was taken down, it would announce the fall of the entire Guangdong, which would eventually affect the nearby cities. Once he continued to move southwest, he would probably join forces with Zhu Huihua. If that was the case, they would cooperate with each other, and the Southern Ming army would be caught in a pincer attack. If that was the case, the Southern Ming Empire would be in danger. In order to quickly resolve the Southern Ming Empire's crisis, Yingzong listened to Empress Qian and asked Yang Chendong to come out. He wanted to quickly resolve the matter in Guangdong, so that the Southern Ming Empire could focus on dealing with Zhu Huixin, suppress the rebellion, and accumulate national strength. Looking at the information that stated that Huang Yuliang had over 200,000 soldiers, Yang Chendong threw the information onto the table. What 200,000? That was including the civilians that he had threatened. In reality, the army that he could use should be no more than 20,000 people. Moreover, most of them were people who could only fight battles that went smoothly. Once they encountered a strong army, they would probably kneel down and surrender after a single exchange. Yang Chendong naturally wouldn't put such an opponent in his eyes. All he was thinking about was how to gain more benefits from it. The south had been rich since ancient times. Although Guangdong had forbidden the sea, it had not been that long, and there were still many rich people. Among them, there was no lack of families that were as rich as a country. They usually had many connections that could ensure the safety of their family business, and the imperial court could not do anything to them. However, in the eyes of the rebels, these families were the best. They did not care about your identity or what kind of connections you had. They only knew that you were someone who would rob if you had money. Taking advantage of these chaotic times to steal their wealth was the best opportunity. Yang Chendong had his eyes on them, so how could he let them go? Thinking that once he obtained the wealth of these families in Guangdong, he would be able to further develop Qiqian City. Yang Chendong's face revealed a brilliant smile. Just as he was in a good mood, Beta Persei's thunderous voice came from outside the study. "Young master, Guaning requests to see you." "Oh, let him wait in the side hall." Yang Chendong put away the smile on his face, as if performing a magic trick. His face became much more normal. Only then did he walk out of the study unhurriedly, heading towards the side hall. In the side hall, Guaning did not wear his official robes, but changed into a military general's armor, looking majestic. When he saw Yang Chendong, who was dressed in green, step in, he immediately lowered his head and cupped his fists in greeting. Guaning greets the imperial envoy. The so-called imperial envoy was not necessarily a high-ranking official. It was just a special title appointed by the emperor when he went to a place to do things. When he was an imperial envoy, he did have the power to do things as he pleased, and for this he looked quite powerful. Even the political envoy, equivalent to the current position of provincial governor, of the various regions had to listen to his orders. However, once he returned to the court and was removed from this position, he would be reinstated. His power would be greatly reduced, and he would become ordinary and normal again. There were even some imperial envoys who, because they had too much power and offended too many people, would be impeached by the other officials once they were removed from their power. In the end, it was normal for them to not have a good ending. Thus, from a certain perspective, the imperial envoy's job was not easy. Guan Ying's respectful greeting was also for the position of imperial envoy. It did not seem like he respected Yang Chendong very much. Of course, Yang Chendong was aware of this. However, compared to other people, Yang Chendong did not care about the southern Ming court at all. Thus, even if he were to one day be removed from his position as imperial envoy, it would not affect him much. All he wanted was superficial respect and temporary respect, and that was enough. Thus, facing Guan Ying's greeting, he nodded lightly. "Can I call you General Guan in the future?" "In that case, I like this title very much." Guaning raised his head after hearing this and revealed a kind smile. "Good General Guan. Since it is like this, we will be working together for a period of time in the future. I hope you will not be stingy with your guidance." Yang Chendong also nodded with satisfaction. He liked officials who were practical. On the other hand, those who opened their mouths and spoke of the emperor's boundless kindness and the righteousness of the world were mostly armchair strategists. He did not believe that such people were very capable. Yang Chendong's politeness fell into Guan Ying's ears. He immediately replied politely, "Imperial envoy is joking. However, if there is anything you need my cooperation with, just tell me." "Good. Since it is like this, I will have to trouble General Guan to organize the specific situation of Guangdong and the information of the local officials and send it to me. I need to understand them further, so that I can make judgments." Yang Chendong immediately said without any trace of politeness. Although the Security Bureau had its own intelligence system, under his orders, they had long begun to pay attention to the development of the situation in Guangdong. Furthermore, there were already people who had infiltrated the chaotic army. However, since it was intelligence, of course, the more the better. They could also make comparisons at crucial times. Guanning had long prepared for Yang Qindong's request. This was also the order of Kuangya minister before he left. It was that he could report to Yang Qindong in detail if there was anything related to Guangdong. Since Ingzong had chosen Yang Qindong as the main general, then naturally, everything had to be done in cooperation. Thinking of this, Guanning once again cupped his hands and replied, "Please be at ease, Imperial Envoy. I will go back and organize the information, and try to send the things you want as soon as possible. And then you can go." Yang Qindong nodded, and began to send him off. However, Guanning didn't intend to leave immediately. Instead, he lowered his head and pondered for a while before saying, "Duke of Loyalty and Courage, there is a woman in my courtyard who admires Duke's talent very much. Please let me report to her." "Girl." When Yang Qindong said this, the beautiful girl he saw in the courtyard appeared in his mind. He immediately nodded lightly. "All right, I like to give pointers to the younger generation. Let her come over when she has time." Chapter 354. Thank you, Duke of Loyalty and Courage. Guanning did not address him as an imperial envoy, but as a duke, indicating that this was a private matter. Thinking that Yang Qindong would understand the meaning, since the matter was done, he cupped his fist and left. Just as Guanning left, Beta Persei walked in with the deputy director of the Security Bureau, Yang San. "Young master, that woman's identity has been investigated. Let Yang San say it. She should be sent by Emperor Ingzong." Yang Qindong first nodded slightly to Yang San, then stared sharply at him. Being stared at by Yang Qindong, Yang San quickly cupped his fist and replied, "Young master's eyes are sharp. That woman indeed came on the emperor's order." "Oh." Hearing that he had guessed correctly, Yang Qindong couldn't help but laugh, then said, "It seems that after young master, I married 4 beautiful wives. I'm afraid that everyone in the world thinks that I'm a womanizer. It's also rare that the dignified Emperor Ingzong would cater to my liking. Forget it, forget it. Tell me her true identity." The young master actually knew everything. While Yang San was impressed, he also replied, "The woman's surname is Su, named Man, or also known as Su Wugu, referring to her soft and charming skills that few people can match, as if she doesn't have any bones in her body. This person is the #1 courtesan by the Qinhuai River, 18 years old, but has always been clean and honest, selling her skills and not her body. Because of her exceptional beauty and her proficiency in zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting, many nobles flocked to her. Even the current emperor of the southern Ming Dynasty was tempted by her. However, due to the rumors, he didn't take any action. This time, it was Minister Kuangya who invited her here under the emperor's order. As for the reason, it still needs to be investigated in detail. To be able to get such detailed information in such a short time, it is enough to show the powerful ability of the Security Bureau. Yang Qindong was also very satisfied with this. "Well done. Since that's the case, send someone to investigate again. We must ensure that the information is detailed and accurate." Yang San, who was praised by Yang Qindong, was very excited. "Young master, please rest assured that the Security Bureau will immediately send people to investigate and clarify all the details. We can use Mao Mu's connections. Since it's related to women, he must know more about it since he works for Empress Qian." Yang Qindong pointed out. His intuition told him that if Suma Nair had only come because she admired him, he could understand. However, as the #1 courtesan on the banks of the Qinhuai River, she didn't have to take the risk. Whether or not there was a problem in this was worth pondering. If he didn't find out the reason, he wouldn't feel at ease letting her stay by his side. Yang Sen quickly left after receiving the order. Beta Persei, who had just left, quickly came in and said with a troubled expression, "Young master, Miss Su wants to see you." "I see. I'm busy with something important. Let third madam accompany her." Yang Qindong was looking down at something and didn't even raise his head as he spoke. In the backyard of the Yang family's old house, third Madame Shui went to see Suma Nair after receiving Beta Persei's report. Not to mention that they were all courtesans, they had a lot in common. This Suma Nair was quite capable. It didn't take long for her to attract bursts of laughter from Madame Shui. Such laughter alarmed First Madame Huyen. She learned the identity of the visitor from her personal maid, Xiaoqing. After thinking about it, she went to the study and saw Yang Chendong. Sixth brother. Huyen appeared. Seeing Yang Chendong sitting on a wooden chair with his eyes closed, she called him softly. Yenner, come here. Hearing the sound, Yang Chendong opened his eyes. When he saw Huyen standing outside the door, he smiled and raised his hands, as if asking for a hug. A trace of shyness flashed across Huyen's face. She walked into the study with a 3-inch golden lotus, and soon fell into Yang Chendong's arms. Even so, she still said shyly, Sixth brother, Beta Persei and Xiaoqing are outside. I'm afraid they will laugh at us. What are you laughing at? You're my wife and I'm your husband. It's natural for us to love each other as husband and wife. There's no need to care so much. Yang Chendong said indifferently. After picking up Huyen, he frowned slightly. Why have you lost weight again? Are you not satisfied with the food? Alas, the southern food is good, but it's too bland. No, it's very good. I like these bland foods. Huyen shook her head quickly. She was born in the Hu family. Since she was born, her grandfather, Hu Xiao, had been a high-ranking official. She grew up in luxury and had never been mistreated. But compared to after following Yang Chendong, she found that her previous life was somewhat shabby. Yang Chendong was not short of money, and the things he sold were all good. Once they were put on the market, they would be easily digested. It was not an exaggeration to say that the supply could not meet the demand. The price of such goods was naturally very high, and the profit was naturally great. Under such circumstances, the Yang family had always eaten the best and wore the best. As the first madam, Huyen was the first to eat good things. It was really much better than what she ate when she was a girl in the Hu residence. Huyen was very satisfied. When Yang Chendong complained that he was not satisfied with the food, she said those words. But since Yang Chendong said so, how could she easily change her mind because of the words of others? Well, Lulang didn't say that the southern food is bad. He was just afraid that you are not used to it after living in the north for a long time. How about this? We really have nothing to do in the afternoon. Why don't we barbecue by ourselves? In this way, we can add ingredients according to each person's appetite. Won't everyone be satisfied? Speaking of which, Yang Chendong had not barbecued with them for a long time. Huyen really missed it. Of course, the delicious food was a part of it, but more importantly, she would have the opportunity to work with Yang Chendong and improve their relationship. She immediately nodded in agreement. That's good. Then this concubine will have someone arrange it. By the way, do you want to call Miss Su together? No need. Yang Chendong said with a normal expression. This is just our family's activity. There's no need to disturb any outsiders. Oh, okay. When Huyen answered, her expression was very natural, but her eyes were much brighter, as if she had put down something. Huyen left. When she left, her footsteps were obviously much lighter. Yang Chendong saw all of this. He knew that no woman was willing to share the man she liked with other women. No matter how magnanimous she was and how nice her words were, when it really happened, there would still be a trace of resistance and unwillingness in her heart. Thinking of this, although Su Maner was indeed unbelievably beautiful, Yang Chendong still lost some interest. When he had many women, he realized that the thought was the most important. As for women, how many was enough? How many was enough to satisfy one? Huyen left happily. Then, as the wife of the family head, she began to take care of the barbecue in the afternoon. As the number one cook Yang Chendong had used for many years, Ichioer was naturally the main force. This time, she had also returned to Jianing Mansion from the capital. At this moment, she began to prepare all kinds of ingredients and condiments. Not long after, fourth brother Yang Yang also rushed over after hearing the news. When he was in the capital, he had been lucky enough to participate in the barbecue once and found it very interesting. Now that he had another chance, how could he let it go? He immediately rolled up his arms and sleeves, indicating that he was going to do something. Since Master Yang Si was here, third Madame Shui naturally had to show up. After hearing the news from the maid Xiaowei, she found an excuse to ask Su Maner to leave. As soon as she entered the backyard, she saw Huyen, who was busy directing the crowd from afar. She called her sister and came over. As soon as Hu Yan saw Madame Shui, she blinked twice and asked as if there was a hidden meaning in her words. "Sister, you're here. By the way, where is Miss Su?" Madame Shui naturally knew that Hu Yan was testing her, so she answered with a smile. "I told her that I was tired, so she sensibly left. By the way, what did my husband mean?" As she spoke, she pointed in the direction of the study with her slender finger. "He didn't mean anything. It's just that when I asked if we should invite Miss Su to barbecue together, Lulang said that this was a family matter, and there was no need to invite outsiders." When Hu Yan said the last sentence, she was already smiling like a beautiful woman. "Sister, you're amazing." Madame Shui secretly praised her sister after hearing this. The so-called amazing naturally referred to Hu Yan's testing. It was just a simple question, which would not reveal anything, but she did get the answer she wanted. At least, Miss Su would not have the opportunity to become their sister for the time being. While the two women were whispering here, Yang Si had been driven out of the kitchen by Yi Qiuer and the others. Important place. The reason was naturally because not only could he not be of any help, he would only cause trouble. However, he did not care about this. Instead, he asked where sixth brother was and hurried over. Yang Chendong was about to go from the study to the inner courtyard when he saw his brother. He said with a smile, "Fourth brother, why are you so travel-worn? Did you fall in love with a good person or something else?" Good person naturally referred to beautiful women, and something else referred to interesting things. This time, Yang Chendong followed Yang Chendong back to the Yang family's old mansion. Nominally, he was returning to his hometown to pay respects to his ancestors, but in reality, he was going on a sightseeing tour. After leaving the shackles of the capital, he, who was originally a hedonistic young master, received the support of Yang Chendong and spent a lot of money to get many things he liked, including some beauties and rare objects. Regarding this, Yang Chendong didn't have the slightest intention to stop it. Since it was his own elder brother, why not spend some money to make him happy? Moreover, his fourth brother had always been on his side, which was rare. He should cherish and keep it. Chapter 355. After being praised by Yang Chendong as a good person, Yang immediately laughed in embarrassment. It was true that he was fourth brother, and in terms of age he was much older than Yang Chendong. However, it was as if he had not grown up yet. He liked to show all his thoughts on his face. However, it was only awkward for a moment before he immediately countered with a smile. "That's right, fourth brother heard that a beauty came to the residence. It is said that she is the #1 courtesan of the Qinhuai Sea. She is very beautiful. Has sixth brother seen her before?" "Of course I have. She is indeed very beautiful." Yang Chendong did not have any intention of hiding and gave a direct answer. "Oh, she is so beautiful. Why is sixth brother not moved?" Yang Si's interest was immediately piqued. He asked as he walked forward. "Hee, there is no good beauty. There is no good banquet." Yang Chendong said with a prophecy. Yang was able to become a disciple of the Yang family and play around in the capital for so many years without any problems. He really had some ability. Just from this sentence he felt something. He immediately asked carefully. "Since that is the case, fourth brother should control himself. At the very least, you have to find out the other party's background. Of course, sixth brother is no longer a virgin. Fourth brother, don't worry." In response to Yang Chendong's reminder, Yang Chendong smiled, and then strode towards the inner courtyard at the back. He had heard of the honey trap countless times. This kind of cliché method might be the most useful in many cases. However, when it came to being useful to him, it was not an easy matter. The loyal duke knew what he needed now, and what he should stay away from. The inner courtyard at the back started to become lively. Not long after, the smell of smoke and fire started to drift in with the air. Xiao Yunju, who was also in the inner courtyard but was not considered a maid in the inner courtyard, pouted and had an unhappy expression. "Young miss, what are they doing? Why didn't they call us over?" Su Maner, who was addressed as young miss, naturally also felt the commotion outside the wall. However, her expression was ordinary, and no emotions could be seen. She lowered her head to look at a zither score. Only when Xiaoyan asked did she raise her head and say, "That is the Duke of Loyal and Bold's family matter. We are still just outsiders." Outsiders? No matter what he said, it didn't matter. Who was the young mistress? She was the #1 courtesan on the banks of the Qinhuai River, who knew how many nobles had to pay in every possible way just to see the young mistress. There were also many who wanted to marry the young mistress as a concubine. There were even some young talents who wanted to marry the young mistress as their official wife. They were nothing now, but perhaps in a few years, they would become high and mighty figures. It was a good choice. But what are we doing here? She had taken the initiative to deliver herself to the door, but the other party didn't even bother to meet her. He only sent a concubine to have a chat, and that was considered a welcome. Thinking about it, it was really infuriating. "Miss, why don't we leave this place and return to Qinhuai River to continue our carefree life?" Xiaoyan was a straightforward person, saying whatever she thought of. In the end, all of this was because she felt wronged and wanted to fight for justice for her young miss. However, when Su Maner heard this, a hint of melancholy flashed across her face. Fortunately, Xiaoyan only cared about her own mouth and did not notice this scene at all. Su Maner fell silent again, and her gaze landed on the zither score again. Seeing that her young miss had no intention of being moved, Xiaoyan could only mumble for a while and shut her mouth again. Su Maner's matter was just a spice in life. When Yang Chendong decided not to meet her for the time being before he had a clear understanding of her background, she was like air. Other than occasionally paying respects to First Madame Hu Yan and discussing her skills with Third Madame Shui, she stayed in the Yang family's side courtyard quite quietly. In the blink of an eye, half a month had passed. The Lung Feng army had already disembarked from Fuzhou Prefecture. According to Yang Chendong's instructions, they did not turn to Jianing. Instead, they headed straight for Jiangxi's Ganzhou to meet up. Yang Chendong also left Jianing Prefecture the day after he received the news, and headed straight for Ganzhou. The ancestral worship seemed to have come to an end. When Yang Chendong left the Yang family's old mansion, other than the old housekeeper, Yang Hai, who stayed behind to preside over the overall situation, fourth brother, Yang Yang, also stayed behind. This was Yang Yang's request and Yang Chendong's tacit approval. The situation on the battlefield was ever-changing. Even with the most advanced firearms, Yang Chendong did not dare to say that he would win every battle without any danger. If he brought fourth brother with him, if something happened, how would he answer to the Yang family? It was safer to stay in Jianing. As for whether it was safe to stay here, as long as Yang Chendong was on the front lines and the war was going smoothly, no one would make things difficult for him. Who would do such a thankless task that would offend others? Not only that, the Nanming Empire would probably focus on protecting his safety. Other than fourth brother Yang Yang, everyone else, including the two madams, followed him out of Jianing and headed straight for Ganzhou. This naturally included General Guan Ying and Su Maner, who were allowed to follow the army. After the large group of people left the city, they traveled quickly along the road. Their speed was not slow at all. Yang Chendong sat in the luxurious carriage in the center, and did not show his face. Su Maner wanted to strike up a conversation with him several times, but did not manage to catch a glimpse of him. From Su Maner's point of view, this Duke of Loyalty was really mysterious. She had been here for more than 10 days, but she had only seen his back view from afar. It was so difficult for her to see this person, as if she was seeing the emperor. All these changes lasted until they reached the outskirts of Ganzhou city. Finally, Su Maner, who was sitting in the carriage, could see Yang Chendong's true appearance. It was a rainy and gloomy day. In this kind of weather, people should be hiding in their houses. Even if they were rushing, they should be hiding in their carriages. Soldiers should be hiding in their barracks. However, this was not the case at the outskirts of Ganzhou city. Looking from afar, a green wall that was as tall as a person appeared in front of her. It was not affected by the rain outside at all. The green wall that appeared from afar was Yang Xie's new army of 3,000 soldiers. Among them, 1,000 were the elite 2nd Battalion of the Cold Front. 2,000 were the 1st Battalion of the Auxiliary Battalion, whose combat strength was slightly lower, but whose overall quality was much higher than the ordinary Ming army. Lung Feng was still dressed the same as before. He was wearing a green camouflage uniform with a beret on his head and military boots on his feet. From afar, he looked majestic and valiant. The auxiliary battalion wore a more ordinary green uniform for training. They did not have any standard military ranks. Even so, when 2,000 people stood together neatly, it still gave off a very majestic feeling. Among them, many people were holding back their energy, thinking that they could change into a more spirited camouflage uniform and become a true member of the Cold Front. This comparison was purposely arranged by Yang Qindong. The Cold Front was suppressing the auxiliary battalion everywhere. This was equivalent to encouraging everyone. If they wanted to receive better treatment and more respect, they had to rely on their own efforts to achieve it. The sudden appearance of the 3,000 Cold Front was waiting for their master, the young master, Yang Qindong, to inspect them. Once they entered Yangxie, even if they were the lowest level of auxiliary battalion, they still needed to train their formation. This was so that one day, the 6th young master could inspect them and prove themselves. Now that the main character had finally appeared, everyone stood up with 200% of their spirit. Even if it was drizzling, it would not be able to stop their passion from radiating in all directions. The Cold Front was right in front of them, waiting to be inspected. As their master, Yang Qindong had to appear. Therefore, he walked out of the luxurious carriage and pushed away Tiger's Mane, who was about to hold an umbrella for him. Dressed in green, he walked with steady steps towards the Cold Front. At this moment, just by looking at his back, he was like a giant. He appeared on the ground and covered all the light in the world. Naturally, he became the most dazzling person. What Su Maner saw was Yang Qindong's majesty at this moment. The other person saw the strict military discipline and a solemn murderous aura. Guanning originally had experience in the military. Later on, he was transferred to Bingcheng by Kuang Ye's discerning eyes. This kind of person, who had both practical experience and theory, naturally had a different understanding of the military than normal people. Just like now, what he saw was a wave of majesty and solemnity that could even shake his soul. Guanning had followed Kuang Yi to inspect the entire country's military, and had seen countless soldiers. However, even the royal army that belonged to Emperor Ingzong's direct subordinates didn't seem to be able to compare with these mercenaries in terms of aura. Strictly speaking, the difference wasn't just a little bit. Guanning could be considered to have heard of the name of mercenaries. Minister Kuang Yi had said more than once that although the mercenaries he saw at the Battle of Tumu Castle were only 100 or so people, their military discipline was strict, and their killing intent was overflowing. When he heard this in the past, Guanning always thought that Minister Kuang Yi was exaggerating, and was even praising others while lowering his own morale. Perhaps this was a method of encouragement, but it was too much and could easily hurt the morale of the southern Ming army. However, when he saw the mercenaries lined up neatly, he knew that Minister Kuang Yi was not lying. The army in front of him was indeed the first he had seen in his life. Just this kind of aura made him feel full of confidence. Perhaps this kind of army should be invincible. No matter what kind of thoughts others had when they saw this scene. Yang Qindong, who was walking forward, felt agitated. When the camouflage uniforms appeared in front of him, he felt as if a lifetime had passed. It was as if he had returned to that era, and could see the most adorable and respectable comrades in arms. It was because of this group of people that the country could have dignity, be recognized by others, and be able to stand tall in the world and not be bullied by others. This kind of feeling lasted until he walked to the front of the formation. The commander of the 2nd Cold Front Regiment, Luo Pe, ran out from the formation, and stood in front of Yang Qindong. He shouted in a loud voice, "Chief, the 2nd Cold Front Regiment and the 1st Auxiliary Regiment have finished gathering. There should be 3,098 people. 3,098 people. Please inspect them." Chapter 356. The loud and impassioned voice was like a waterfall that soared into the sky. At this moment, not only were the 3,000 soldiers standing upright, even Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, Wu Sheng, and the other elites of the Cold Front who were watching all this from afar stood upright. They looked like they were about to be inspected by Yang Qindong. Please be at ease. Yang Qindong's heartbeat quickened, but he tried his best to maintain a calm expression. Yes, sir. Luo Pa saluted again, then turned around and ran back to the formation. He stood beside the political commissar of the 2nd Regiment, Kong Jia, and looked at Yang Qindong in front of him. Their 6th young master was also the founder of Yang Xie's new army. He was also their leader and spiritual pillar. To become a member of the Cold Front, one had to go through the recognition of loyalty. What was loyalty? It was to be loyal to the 6th young master. In this aspect, the political instructors did a good job. Their usual propaganda was also on point. They used an almost brainwashing method to make everyone understand that the reason why they could have such good equipment, such good military discipline, such a good life, and such a beautiful and limitless future was all thanks to the support and contributions of the 6th young master. The 6th young master had done so much for them, so what should they do to thank him? Shouldn't he perform well and prove his strength with his actions? Should he prove that the 6th young master didn't misjudge him? At the same time, he should use his actions to fight for more glory and protect this hard-won happiness for himself and his future descendants? It was precisely because of this kind of teaching that Yang Qindong was gradually regarded as the incarnation of God. As long as it was the Cold Front, no one would not respect him and thank him. And today, this legendary figure was standing in front of them. How could they not be excited? How could they not be excited? After the order to be at ease, the 3,000 soldiers raised their left feet in unison. Then, Yang Qindong walked to the front of the 3,000 people in a few strides. Dressed in green, he looked a little frail, especially under the drizzle. He looked a little haggard. However, when the person standing there was Yang Qindong, everything changed. When he opened his mouth and said, "Comrades, thank you for your hard work," the 3,000 soldiers replied in unison, "We serve the people." Good. I have seen your performance. I am very happy and even a little excited. Yang Qindong raised his right hand, and the 3,000 Yang Xie soldiers quieted down again. At this moment, only Yang Qindong's voice could be heard in the drizzle. You guys are the most outstanding Cold Front. You guys are also the strongest mercenary army in the world. You guys have the strictest training and the strongest weapons in the world. This means that you guys are now, and will always be, the strongest army. In the future, your children and grandchildren will be proud of you. Today, the heroic sect of the Southern Ming Dynasty invited us to help them quell the rebellion, because they saw your abilities. Only those who have fought 100 battles can be called elite soldiers. Next, you will face real battles, and you might even face life and death. However, please believe me when I say that as long as you can perform normally and perform well with what you have learned, the winner will definitely be you. Military achievements are right in front of you, and glory is right in front of you. Comrades, work hard. I will watch your wonderful performance from the side. Do you have the confidence to defeat the enemy and show our military might? Yes. 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 The excited voices continued to reverberate in the air. At this moment, the drizzle stopped, as if it was affected by the warrior's passion. The moment the drizzle stopped, Yang Qindong saluted solemnly and ended his speech. In fact, Yang Qindong had a lot to say, so he had to choose some things to say. After all, Guaning was behind him, and there were a few great Ming soldiers following him. When the time was not right, he had to endure and hide some things. After he finished speaking, the soldier was also promoted at this moment. The companies of the various battalions began to lead their troops to change directions, opening up a path for the 6th Young Master's convoy to move forward. The commander of the 2nd Regiment, Luo Pa, and the political commissar, Kong Jia, as well as the commander of the 1st Regiment, Lu Zhua, and the political commissar, Song Jia, quickly ran in front of Yang Qindong, as if they were waiting for orders. Yang Qindong, who had been prepared for this, immediately handed a battle order to the political commissar of the 2nd Regiment, Kong Jia. This is the next step of the battle. Familiarize yourselves with it first, then strictly carry it out. During this time, the 2nd Battalion of the 2nd Regiment will replace the 1st Battalion to be in charge of the young master's safety. Yes. The 4 regimental commanders saluted in unison, and began to make arrangements. Then they waited for the military meeting to begin. At this moment, the great Ming soldiers beside the cold front finally gathered. Guanning, who was at the back of the group, also came over. Duke of Loyalty, Guangdong Political Commissioner, and the generals from the surrounding areas are all here. Also, we have new news. Zhaoqing Prefecture has been attacked by the bandits. Zhaoqing General Jiaping has arrived and is waiting for Duke of Loyalty's instructions. Zhaoqing is lost. Yang Chendong stood there with a solemn face and asked, "Yes, it's lost." Guanning lowered his head and said in pain. When he saw the strict military discipline of the mercenaries and how majestic their troops were, he was determined to go all out. However, the bad news that followed was like a bucket of cold water that instantly woke him up. Thinking of his own incompetence and the strength of the mercenaries, this stark contrast made him feel even more ashamed and unable to show his face. "All right, gather them here. There are some things that need to be decided." Yang Chendong's voice was calm as usual, but for some reason, Guanning felt a trace of killing intent from his words. However, when he thought about it, they had yet to meet an enemy. Perhaps it was just his own misconception. Guanning moved quickly. In less than an hour, a 70 to 80 square meter military tent was erected. The generals of the nearby Great Ming Army also gathered here. Before he could inform anyone, Yang Chendong brought a group of mercenaries into the tent. Following Yang Chendong's entrance, the southern Ming generals who were originally chattering immediately shut their mouths. Then they curiously looked at the youngest loyal duke of the Great Ming Dynasty, who had just walked in with a fawning expression. The Duke of Loyalty had long been famous, but everything came from hearsay. It was because of hearsay that everyone had their own understanding. Yang Chendong was only in his early 20s, but the hearsay and legend had been criticized by too many people. For example, saving Emperor Yingzong and the 9 important ministers was just a matter of luck. For example, repelling the Walla army was just a matter of Emperor Yingzong hiding his own strength and giving the credit to Yang Chendong. However, all these hearsay and legends seemed unreal after seeing Yang Chendong meet with the mercenaries. Could it be that this young Duke of Loyalty and Courage really had a great ability? The doubt, curiosity, and even speculation in their eyes became more and more intense. Under such gazes, Yang Chendong walked into the tent and sat down on the main seat. The moment he sat down, Hu Mang, who was following beside him, took out the imperial sword bestowed by Emperor Yingzong and held it in his hands. The appearance of the imperial sword caused everyone's eyes to involuntarily focus. What did this action mean? Was it showing his authority? Many people's expressions changed, but there were also some who showed disapproving expressions. Perhaps in their eyes, this action was a sign of cowardice. If you really had authority, why did you need to use the imperial sword to do things? While everyone was guessing, Yang Chendong's gaze fell on Guanning, who was standing on the left. "General Guan, you can begin." "Yes, Lord Imperial Envoy." Guanning nodded his head, emphasizing the word Imperial Envoy. Then he introduced Yang Chendong to the Ming Dynasty officials in the tent. Guangdong Political Commissioner Lu Yufu, who was sitting on the right, was an old man who looked to be in his 50s. He was a secondary Grade 2 official. He had been appointed for less than a year. Guangdong Police Commissioner Han Qing was a man in his 40s with a murderous aura. He was in charge of the criminal matters of Guangdong Province, and was also a secondary Grade 2 official. Guangdong Guard Commander Ma Wei, Primary Grade 3. Pingyue House General He Sheng, Primary Grade 4. Shaozhou House General Yu Guang, Primary Grade 4. Following Guan Ying's introduction, everyone who was called gave Yang Chendong a friendly smile. To this, Yang Chendong also smiled in response. At the end of the introduction, when Zhaoqing House General Jiaping was introduced, Yang Chendong suddenly interrupted. "You're the general who just lost Zhaoqing House?" Jiaping, who was called, trembled all over. This time, he purposely didn't change his armor. He wanted to show his blood-soaked side so that he could win the sympathy of others. After all, Zhaoqing Prefecture was lost in his hands. In reality, he was indeed fearful of the enemy. When Zhaoqing Prefecture was still able to hold on, he was attacked by Huang Yuliang's bandits. Worried about his own safety, he abandoned the Zhaoqing Prefecture's magistrate who still wanted to defend the city, and escaped with 100 soldiers. Because of Jia Ping's sudden escape, the city fell into chaos. The morale of the soldiers was low. Even a general had no confidence, let alone a normal soldier. In order to survive, some of them opened the city gates and led the bandits into the city. In the end, most of the civilians were robbed, and the Zhaoqing house's prefect was killed in the chaos. Not long after he escaped, Jia Ping received the news. He was indeed afraid at first, but when he saw Lord Han Qing of the detention bureau in Gan Province City, he finally relaxed. It wasn't for any other reason. It was only because this person was his backer. So he usually showed his filial piety to him. Moreover, he had contacted the Jia clan for this matter, and had taken out a large sum of money to give to Han Qing in order to protect his life. Chapter 357. As the person in charge of all of Guangdong's penal matters, after receiving Jia Ping's filial piety, Han Qing expressed that he would protect his life, but he would have to endure it for a while. When the time was right, he would use him again. Abandoning the city and becoming the general of a defeated army seemed to be a very shameful matter. However, he was not the only one who had lost the city. At least, it looked like he had killed enemies while bathed in blood. Based on this, Han Qing had some confidence. He had even greeted the administrative commissioner, Lu Youfu, for this matter. Once the imperial envoy arrived, he would take the opportunity to say a few good words. Presumably, the matter would pass. It was because of this that Jia Ping had the confidence to appear here. After hearing Yang Chendong's words about him, his expression changed. He immediately knelt on the ground. Sir Imperial Envoy, please understand. I did indeed bravely kill the enemy. However, the situation was like this, so I had no choice but to retreat from the city. With Jia Ping kneeling, the Guangdong Prison Bureau's Han Qing also stepped out from the ranks. General Jia Ping's words are not wrong. This time, the bandit army is indeed superior in numbers. We had no choice but to abandon the city. Imperial Envoy, please understand. Han Qing stepped out and took the initiative to plead for leniency for Jia Ping. After the other Guangdong officials saw this scene, they all understood tacitly. They knew that he must have received a lot of money to save his life. Even if they were fellow officials, shouldn't they also stand out and contribute? If they formed good karma now, presumably, there would be benefits in the future. Furthermore, with the idea of dying if the lips and teeth were cold, pleading for leniency for Jia Ping now was equivalent to leaving an extra path of retreat for themselves. Who could guarantee that they would not make a mistake? All of the officials thought this way. At this time, even the Guangdong Administrative Commissioner, the highest-ranking official here, was prepared to step out and speak. As the leader of Guangdong, protecting his subordinates at critical times was one of his responsibilities. Only then could he receive the respect of others and better pass on his ideals and orders. Thus, the atmosphere in the tent became lively. Many people were eager to give it a try. As long as one person stepped out, the others would follow suit and plead for leniency. With the law not punishing the masses, presumably this young imperial envoy could not do anything to them. Everyone was waiting for Lu Youfu to make a move, and even more people's gazes landed on the chief administrator Lu Youfu. However, it was at this moment that the young voice suddenly rang out. Oh, a loser who lost a city still had a reason? What's more, there were even people pleading for him. Very good, very good. But I wonder if there are any other lords pleading for him? Come, let this duke and this imperial envoy take a look. Let us see how united your Guangdong officials are. Lu Youfu, who was about to take a step forward with his right leg, suddenly stopped in his tracks. From these words, he felt a killing intent. From these words, he felt a resentment. From these words, he felt a chill that caused his heart to palpitate from head to toe. A new broom sweeps clean. This phrase unknowingly appeared in his mind. At this moment, his body that was about to step forward hesitated. Lu Youfu didn't make any moves, and the other officials naturally watched quietly from the side. On the other hand, after Han Qing heard Yang Chendong's words, he stood there with his neck raised. With an unconvinced expression, he asked, "But what does the imperial envoy mean by this? What does it mean?" "It is not your turn to ask me." In response to Han Qing's interruption, Yang Chendong replied without any trace of politeness. However, his words were all merciless. After these words, Han Qing's expression became very ugly. His face flushed red as if he had been constipated for a long time. What happened next made Han Qing even angrier. He saw Yang Chendong suddenly wave his hand and say to the captain of the first guards, Qiu Vi, and the others guarding the tent door, "Come, take down this criminal Jia Ping who is as cowardly as a mouse, fearful of the enemy like a tiger, and incompetent." Yes. Having received the order, Qiu Vi and the others immediately strode over. Among them, 2 of the cold front guards immediately reached out and pressed down on Jia Ping's shoulders. When the large hands landed like pincers, Jia Ping's expression became pained. He even lost the ability to speak in an instant. To the side, Han Qing was shocked that Jia Ping was suddenly restrained. He suddenly pointed at Yang Chendong behind the main table and said, "You can't do this. Jia Ping's matter has not been concluded yet. How can you punish him for nothing? We are not convinced." Not convinced? As if he had long expected Han Qing to say this, Yang Chendong abruptly stood up from his chair. Based on what Jia Ping said just now, what kind of general situation is this that they had no choice but to retreat from the city? May I ask, where did the general situation come from? What is the general situation he spoke of? Is he referring to the South Ming losing power and about to be destroyed? Yang Chendong's sudden questioning caused Han Qing's expression to change again and again. However, he was worthy of being the head of a province's police division, coming into contact with all types of criminal cases and all types of official infighting matters every day. His reaction was still extremely fast. After just an instant of change in expression, he once again calmed his mind, saying, "You are taking the meaning out of the chapter. That is not what General Jia Ping meant." Meaning? What does he mean? What do you mean? Is it because you accepted his money that you can't do things properly? Oh right, didn't you want evidence? Here you go. With a wave of his hand, pieces of paper with words on them flew up from the table and fluttered in the air. It was as if snow had fallen from the sky. The paper fluttered over and landed on Lu Youfu and the others' bodies and feet. Out of curiosity, they stretched out their hands to receive it. When they saw the contents recorded within, every single one of them was greatly shocked. When they looked at Han Qing and Jia Ping, there was an additional look of sympathy in their eyes. When they looked at Yang Chendong, there was even more shock and fear. What was recorded on the paper were the crimes that Han Qing and Jia Ping had committed. Among them, there was the matter of Jia Ping abandoning the city and escaping because he was afraid of death, causing chaos in Zhaoqing and being taken advantage of by the bandit army. There was also the matter of Han Qing accepting 100,000 taels of silver from the Jia family behind Jia Ping and speaking for him. In these records, there were all kinds of evidence placed on them. For example, the testimony of the soldiers who escaped from death in Zhaoqing, the testimony of the housekeeper in charge of the wealth in the Jia manor, and so on. They all had handprints placed on them. This was already a fact that was set in stone. There was no need for the imperial envoy to fake something like this because it was fake. Regardless of whether it was Han Qing or Jia Ping, they could have brought it up in front of everyone. What they would lose would only be the imperial envoy's face. It might even cause him to not be able to continue doing this job. Putting aside whether it was worth it to wrongly accuse others like this, Jia Ping, who had also seen what was recorded on the paper, was already trembling all over. There was also Han Qing. After seeing all of this, he immediately knelt on the ground with a plop. Then he cried out loudly, "Lord Imperial Envoy, it was all my fault. I am willing to plead guilty and hand over all of this dirty silver. Please have mercy on me." As he cried out loudly, Han Qing's gaze landed on Lu Youfu, who was standing to the side. "Sir Lu, please speak to save me. You know, I was just confused for a moment." Han Qing's cries had proven everything. And it could also be said to be everything. At this moment, everyone knew that Han Qing could be considered to have met with trouble. To throw away his reputation and future for 100,000 taels of silver, no matter how it seemed, it was not worth it. Lu Youfu, who had his name called, gently closed his eyes. He really didn't want to speak for Han Qing. It was fine if he did something dirty, but if he was caught red-handed and brought up publicly, then he was an idiot. For such an idiot, if he spoke out and begged, then wouldn't he also be an idiot? However, even though the logic was like this, Lu Youfu had no choice but to reach out. It was not for any other reason than because he had a good personal relationship with Han Qing. After coming to Guangdong for a year, he had received a lot of filial piety. As a result, the two of them had a deep connection to many things. If the other party really met with trouble, if he just stood by and watched, who knew whether or not a mad dog would randomly bite people? Looking at this imperial envoy's methods, if something really happened to offend him, he would probably be finished. Lu Youfu, who didn't want to speak, had no choice but to do so. After a moment of internal struggle, he still had no choice but to step out from the ranks. He cupped his hands toward Yang Qindong and said, "Imperial envoy, I'm afraid this time." Han Qing was also confused for a moment. "Please, on account of his hard work in governing Guangdong, punish him leniently." "Punish him leniently?" Yang Qindong's gaze stared straight at Lu Youfu. Just this stare made the body of the most powerful man in Guangdong tighten. Although in terms of age, it was possible for him to be the other party's grandfather, in terms of aura he had to admit that Yang Qindong was more dignified and pressuring than all of the young people he had seen. That pair of eyes did not even seem like the eyes of a young person. It seemed to be a pair of aged eyes that had experienced many things. It was as if they could see through anything in the world in an instant. Being questioned, Lu Youfu, whose heart had also been shaken, unconsciously said, "Yes, please be lenient with the imperial envoy. Han Qing's family also has quite a bit of wealth. Presumably, he is willing to donate most of it to provide military supplies for the army to atone for his crime." Using money to buy a crime. This seemed to be something that could only be done in private. Now that Lu Youfu had put it on the table, it seemed very inconceivable. At least, for a scholar who had read the books of sages from a young age, it was an extremely shameful thing. However, at this moment, Lu Youfu really didn't know how to speak for Han Qing. This imperial envoy had just arrived. In terms of personal relations, there was nothing at all. He was not an official of the Southern Ming. Even if he found someone to suppress him, it would probably be very difficult. Even if it was really done, Han Qing's head would probably have already fallen to the ground. In order to save himself, he had no choice but to do this. Even when he said these words, his expression was extremely unnatural. It could be seen that he was truly embarrassed by his own words. Chapter 358. When Lu Youfu said this, Guaning, who was standing in front of him, had an extremely ugly expression. From his point of view, the officials of Guangdong province had truly thrown away the face of the Southern Ming dynasty in today's meeting. The generals had abandoned the city and fled, and the civil officials had received dirty money. If news of this were to spread, who knew how many people would secretly mock them? However, all of this seemed to be incomparable to Lu Youfu's actions. This person had actually openly bribed. Moreover, he had done it in front of so many people. Was he not afraid that Yang Qindong would get angry again, and take his anger out on him? Just as Guaning was feeling angry and resentful, Yang Qindong, who had originally been standing there with an unfriendly expression, suddenly sat down. Then his expression relaxed as he asked, "Oh, willing to donate your family's wealth for military expenses? How much is that? Let me tell you, without me, the imperial envoy, I cannot agree." If the performance of Lu Youfu and the others was already shocking, then when Yang Qindong spoke, it was as if the entire audience had been struck by lightning. At this moment, everyone stood there with a stupefied expression. There were even some people who used their hands to pull at their ears, as if trying to see if there was something wrong with their hearing. One was publicly bribing, the other was publicly bribing. Moreover, all of the people present were important officials of Guangdong. There was no lack of important officials and generals. This scene that he didn't even dare to imagine actually happened. At this moment, even Lu Youfu, who had helplessly spoken the words of bribery, was similarly shocked. He stood there, not knowing what to do. Seeing that the tent had suddenly become quiet, Yang Qindong seemed to be very displeased with everyone's performance. What? Could it be that this imperial envoy did not speak clearly enough? Or is it that the guilty official Han Qing is unwilling to pay? I am willing, I am willing. After finally understanding that all of this was true, Han Qing was like a drowning person who had suddenly grabbed onto a piece of dead wood. He repeatedly said, "The guilty official is willing to pay. How much?" Yang Chendong leaned on the document in front of him and stared into Han Qing's eyes. Pay. Han Qing thought about how Yang Chendong had said he could not take too little. Thinking that this kind of opportunity might not appear a second time, he gritted his teeth and said, "I am willing to take out 200,000 liang of silver to atone for my crimes. Please give me another chance." 200,000. Hearing such an answer, Yang Chendong repeated it softly. Then he stopped talking and looked like he was thinking. This scene really scared Han Qing. He thought that the amount of silver he offered was too little. At that moment he hardened his heart and said, "I am willing to offer 400,000 silver taels. This is all I have. I don't have any more." "Oh, for 100,000 taels. After all, you're a second-rank official of the imperial court. You're worth this price. Since it's like this, let's forget about it. I will not pursue your crimes. As for how the emperor will deal with you, it has nothing to do with me." Yang Chendong waved his hand. This also made Han Qing, kneeling there, let out a breath. He knew that he was fine for now. As for the emperor, based on his relationship with a few important officials in Jingdo, there was still room for negotiation. He was just afraid that he would need to borrow money to get through the disaster. Han Qing had no crimes. The kneeling Zhaoqing General Jiaping seemed to have seen the hope of rebirth. Ignoring the pain in his body when he was pressed down, he shouted loudly, "Imperial envoy, the guilty general is also willing to use silver to atone for his crimes." "You're also willing to use silver?" Yang Chendong seemed to ask with interest. "Yes, the guilty general is willing to use silver. He is also willing to take out 400,000 taels of silver for the expenses of the mercenary army." Jiaping said loudly as if he was afraid that Yang Chendong could not hear him clearly. "Oh, you're only a 4th-level general. Yet you're willing to take out 400,000 taels of silver. It is indeed a lot." After Yang Chendong's words fell, everyone else had an expression of understanding. It seemed that Jiaping was also going to be offended. Before everyone's expressions completely relaxed, Yang Chendong, who had been speaking peacefully, suddenly changed his expression. Following this, he shouted in a roaring voice, "Because of you, tens of thousands of people in Zhaoqing Manor have suffered. Who knows how many southern Ming soldiers have died because of this? You still have the face to talk to me about silver? Where is the imperial sword?" "Here." Tiger's Mane, who was standing to the side, handed over the longsword that Kuang Yi had left behind. It represented that it could behead incapable rulers and slanderers. Following this, Yang Chendong reached out with his right hand and grasped the hilt of the sword. Following this, the sword flashed and the longsword was unsheathed. Then, a stream of blood flew out and coincidentally sprayed onto the face of Han Qing, who was still kneeling on the ground. The sword fell. The head of Jiaping, who had been alive and kicking, fell to the ground, separating him from everyone else. Just like this, Jiaping was killed. This unexpected scene caused everyone to not know what to say for a moment. They had clearly just been discussing the price. Why did he suddenly kill someone? This imperial envoy was not old, but when he did things, it was always unexpected. It was impossible for people to guess his intentions. This kind of imperial envoy was not easy to come into contact with. Many of the officials who saw this scene felt their hearts beat like drums. They thought that in the future, when they did things, they had to be careful to not be caught by the imperial envoy. Otherwise, even if they didn't die, they would have to shed a layer of skin like Han Qing. As for Han Qing, when the blood sprayed onto his face, his expression first froze. Following this, he defecated and urinated. Immediately, an unpleasant smell spread out in the tent. It had to be said that as the person in charge of criminal justice and public affairs, he had seen the world. The number of people who had died under his orders was not small, so it shouldn't be like this. However, if there was something to be blamed, it was Yang Chendong's actions that were too fast. Furthermore, Han Qing himself had committed a crime. He thought that if he hadn't paid the silver earlier, his head would probably have fallen to the ground. How could he not be afraid? How could he not make a fool of himself? Yang Chendong was also very displeased by this unpleasant smell. Forget it, we'll just go out and have a meeting. Oh right, Jia Ping committed a serious crime and cannot be forgiven. That is why I killed him. However, some of his words cannot be disbelieved. For example, before he died he said that the Jia family was willing to pay 400,000 liang of silver. Presumably, everyone heard it and can be used as a witness. Later, I'll have to trouble official Lu to retrieve the silver for military expenses. Of course, if the Jia family doesn't have to pay the silver, then there is no need to keep it. Bribing a high-ranking official is a serious crime and can be punished by death. Originally, everyone was covering their noses from the foul smell coming from Han Qing's body as they walked out. However, when they suddenly heard the last part of Yang Chendong's words, their expressions changed greatly. This imperial envoy was truly a ruthless person. He killed someone and still wanted silver. This was a living king of hell. In the future, no matter who they offended, they should not offend this person. Everyone was greatly shocked. They were frightened by the methods Yang Chendong had displayed. Lu Youfu was the same, but when he heard his name being called, he reacted. He immediately replied obediently, "Yes, please be at ease, Imperial Envoy. The Jia family will definitely take out the 400,000 taels of silver. However, can Jia Ping's body be sent back to the Jia family?" "Of course you can. If you want the body, just take out another 100,000 liang of silver." Yang Chendong appeared to understand. First he nodded his head. However, the next sentence choked Lu Youfu until he didn't know what to say. It was only the body of a dead person, yet it actually cost 100,000 liang of silver. Moreover, these words were spoken by Yang Chendong. The Jia family had no choice but to take it. At this moment he couldn't help but feel sorrow for the Jia family. Of course, he was even more glad that he hadn't acted too excessively just now. Otherwise, even if he didn't die, he would have been skinned alive. Lu Youfu didn't believe that Yang Chendong would let him go just because he had something on Han Qing. He even thought that the other party must have some evidence of his crimes in his hands. However, because his performance was acceptable, he didn't take it out. Thinking this way, he felt that the matter of the Jia family had to be handled seriously. Otherwise, he was afraid that he would be implicated. After Yang Chendong finished speaking, he took the lead and walked out of the large tent. Soon after, everyone followed him out. Once they were out of the tent, the air became a lot fresher. Yang Chendong took a deep breath and said, "Is Pingle General Hisheng here?" "This general is here." When his name was called, Hisheng was first stunned. Then he responded and walked toward Yang Chendong. Seeing that Hisheng was called, the other officials had a puzzled expression on their faces. It must be said that Hisheng was a special case among all the Guangdong generals. This person wasn't corrupt and didn't fit in with the crowd. What he liked to do the most was to train soldiers. In everyone's eyes, Hisheng was an unusual existence. They really couldn't think of anything. Could it be that this kind of person had fallen into the hands of the imperial envoy? If that was the case, then would there be anyone here who was innocent? While everyone was puzzled, they saw Hisheng walking to Yang Chendong's side in the distance. Then the two of them exchanged a few words. After that, this Peacejoy Mansion's general left in high spirits. Nothing happened. Everyone looked at each other. Only then did they realize that this was the imperial envoy arranging military affairs. After understanding this point, everyone was even more puzzled. What did this mean? Why did he arrange the military affairs behind their backs? Could it be that he didn't believe in their loyalty to the Southern Ming Empire? Of course, these thoughts were only in their hearts. If there was anyone who dared to stand out and criticize Yang Chendong, they would have already lost their courage. On the other side, after Hisheng was called away, Shao Province's General Yu Guang was also called over. Then he nodded and quickly left the place. After taking their seats, Yang Chendong turned around and looked at everyone with a smile. "I'm sure everyone must be hungry after being busy. Lord Lu, have you prepared something to eat?" It's ready. Everything has been arranged in Ganzhou City. Imperial Envoy, please go ahead." Seeing that the official business was finally over, Lu Youfu couldn't help but feel relieved. He responded with a smile. Chapter 359. Good. Since that is the case, let's enter the city. Yang Chendong waved his hand. Immediately, everyone entered Ganzhou City in a grandiose manner. The news of Yang Chendong killing Jiaping and severely punishing Han Qing quickly spread throughout the city and the army. When some of the commoners and soldiers heard this news, they were all overjoyed. Not to mention the skill of this young imperial envoy in battle. At least his ability to govern was not bad. The commoners were like this. As long as someone punished a corrupt official, they would be happy. As for whether or not they would be able to gain anything because of this, that was not something they cared about. Lu Youfu gave Yang Chendong a very good residence in Ganzhou City to live in. Naturally, Yang Chendong would not refuse such good intentions. At the same time he gladly accepted, he had his wife, Hu Yan, and the others move in as well. Not only that, but he also had the back garden tidy up. Then he had the third wife, Lady Shui, invite the #1 courtesan by the Qinhuai River, Su Maner, to liven things up. Finally, she could see Yang Chendong's face. Although she was invited over as an entertainer, the servant girl, Xiao Yun, also had many objections. However, as the main character, Su Maner, was not angry at all. In her opinion, being able to come into contact with Yang Chendong was the first step to success. As for how it was done, that was not the most important thing. Moreover, the moment she entered the city, she had heard about Yang Chendong's actions in the large tent. She was very curious. Was this imperial envoy, who had openly bribed someone, not afraid that the matter would reach the emperor and he would be punished? Where did he have the confidence to do such a thing? With all kinds of questions in her mind, Su Maner appeared in the back garden in a long white dress. As soon as Su Maner appeared, she gave people a very stunning feeling. Dressed in white, she appeared incomparably holy. If one did not know that this person had once been a courtesan by the Qinhuai River, one would not have thought that this person came from such a place. On the contrary, judging from her attire and behavior, it would be more accurate to call her a lady from a respectable family. Yang Chendong's eyes narrowed when he saw Su Maner's outfit. Then he slowly leaned against the rattan chair and closed his eyes while Hu Yan and Madame Shui hugged him. Occasionally he would open his mouth and enjoy the peeled fruits that Hu Yan and Madame Shui put in his mouth. Strictly speaking, Yang Chendong's actions were somewhat disrespectful. However, as if she was used to such things, or perhaps she was already mentally prepared, Su Maner was not angry. Instead, she gently tested the pipa in her hand and began to play. She was singing the song, Wishing We Last Forever, by Yang Chendong. It had to be said that the sound coming from Su Maner's mouth was indeed different. Even Madame Shui, who was good at this, kept nodding after hearing it. It was obvious that she approved of Su Maner's playing skills. Yang Chendong sat on the rattan chair with his head slightly tilted back. The corners of his mouth curled into a gentle smile. His right hand tapped gently on the armrest of the rattan chair, as if he was immersed in it. He was in a good mood. Yang Chendong was in a good mood. Hu Yan and Madame Shui, who were sitting beside him, also looked happy. Even Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei, who were standing not far behind, looked happy. In these people's hearts, Yang Chendong's happiness was their happiness, and Yang Chendong's happiness was their happiness. This was a powerful personality charm that could affect the mood of others at any time and place. This warm and wonderful scene lasted for more than an hour. And then everything was ruined by the sounds of fighting and shouting outside. Out of instinct, Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei came to Yang Chendong's side to protect him. In addition, Tai Qingyi, who was standing not far away, also stood in front of Hu Yan and Madame Shui. There were 6 other women standing with her. From the determination in their eyes, it could be seen that they were not afraid of death. This sudden change made Su Maner, who was singing, shut her mouth naturally. When she saw that Hu Yan and Madame Shui were protected by people, and only her maid Xiao Yun came to her side, she did not know why, but there was a faint jealousy in her heart. At this moment, the sounds of fighting outside had stopped. Then came the shout of General Guaning. I want to see the Duke of Loyalty. Let me go. Obviously, the person who came should be Guaning. He probably took things too hard because of what happened in the big tent in the morning, and wanted to see Yang Chendong. However, Yang Chendong, who was in a relaxed state, could not be disturbed by just anyone. He was blocked outside the door as usual. In a moment of anger, he wanted to break in. Let him in. Yang Chendong, who was sitting on the rattan chair, looked calm. It was not clear whether he was really angry, but there was a sense of coldness in his voice. As the voice rang out, there were footsteps in the outer courtyard. Then Guanyin, whose face was slightly red and swollen, walked in under the escort of Four Lung Feng. To be able to have Four Lung Feng following him, it was clear that Guanying's skills were not bad. Looking at the Lung Feng who followed him, it seemed that their clothes were also disheveled. It was clear that the fight just now had been very fierce. Yang Chendong's gaze swept over the 5 people. Then his voice was still indifferent as he asked, "You want to see me?" "That's right, I want to see you. I want to ask you why you did what you did during the day. Also, what were those generals sent out to do? You have to give me an explanation." Guanyin glared and shouted, as if he was very angry. Guanying's shout entered his ears clearly. Sitting there, Yang Chendong first frowned slightly. His gaze swept over Guanying's body again and again. Then, his smile seemed to be forcefully wiped away by an invisible hand. His expression suddenly became much more serious. "Who do you think you are? Do you think I am someone you can see whenever you want to? What I want to do, is it something you can question? You still have an explanation? Let me tell you, even the emperor of the Southern Ming Empire would not order me like this. Since you want an explanation, then I'll give you one. Beta Persei beat him." Yang Chendong's sudden anger scared Guanyin. All this time, although Yang Chendong's actions were unpredictable, his attitude towards him could be considered friendly. At least he didn't get angry at him, to the point that he forgot his identity. Now that he was suddenly reprimanded by Yang Chendong, he realized that he was just a small character. The reason why he didn't do anything to him was because he didn't put him in his eyes and didn't treat him as a dish. Now that he suddenly appeared and disturbed the other party's happy mood, was he going to punish him? As he thought this, he raised his head again and saw the tall Beta Persei walking towards him. Suddenly, anger flashed in his eyes. Guanyin had been in the army and his performance was excellent. His skills were also better than ordinary people. This time, when he followed Kuangye Minister to inspect the various guards, he was more often than not a guard. From this, it could be seen that his skills were quite good. This was also the reason why he dared to charge in alone. But just now, the 4 people he didn't put in his eyes taught him how to be a person. If it was a one-on-one, he was confident that none of the 4 would be a match for him. But in a group fight, the 4 people cooperated very well, and he quickly fell into a disadvantage, to the point that he was pressed to the ground. This was already quite embarrassing. Now Yang Chendong only sent 1 person. Although he was tall, this didn't mean anything. Sometimes a tall and strong person didn't necessarily win in a fight. Strength didn't mean everything. Flexibility and timely exertion of strength were more important. Good. If it's a one-on-one, if I win, can I sit down and have a good talk with the Duke? Seeing that Beta Persei was already in front of him, Guanyin knew that he had to fight, so he asked Yang Chendong loudly, "Aha." Guanying's shout attracted a burst of laughter from the surrounding people. This laughter was like a slap to Guanying's face, making him feel humiliated. "You're going too far." Guanyin didn't get a reply from Yang Chendong, and was instead ridiculed by the crowd. In his anger, he immediately stomped on the ground and flew up. Then, with a step in the air, he kicked at Beta Persei's head. This kick was fast and accurate. If Beta Persei was really stepped on, he would probably fall to the ground. Without resting for a month, he would never be able to recover. Seeing this kick land, Su Maner, who was watching this scene, couldn't help but cover her mouth with her white fingers. From the looks of it, she was quite frightened. The servant girl, Xiao Yin, was much worse than Su Maner. She had already opened her mouth and started screaming. Amidst such screams, Beta Persei's 2 arms, which were as strong as a woman's calves, suddenly stretched out and grabbed at Guanying's legs. Everyone said that an arm couldn't win against a leg. From this, it could be seen that in terms of strength, arms and legs were not equal. However, this saying didn't seem to be practical when applied to Beta Persei. When the pair of arms stretched out to grab, the pair of legs, which should have been invincible, seemed to have been stopped in time. They were grabbed by something and fell into Beta Persei's hands. Then they were restrained and couldn't move. When the pair of arms reached out, they accurately grabbed a pair of ankles. The pair of legs, which were wearing high-waisted cloth shoes, fell into Beta Persei's hands like a toy. When his attack succeeded, he laughed mischievously. Then he forcefully twisted his waist and drew a circle with his feet as the center. Then the pair of large hands in front of his arms suddenly loosened. Like flying a kite, he threw the owner of the pair of feet, Guanying, away. Guanying's kick was originally thought to be able to hurt Beta Persei. He was still thinking that the martial arts of the people around the Duke of Loyalty were only SOSO when he was shocked to find that he couldn't move. Then the whistling sound of the wind rang in his ears and he was thrown away. Chapter 360. Out of instinct, Guanying tried his best to find a direction and a safe way to land. Therefore, when his body landed, he rolled on the ground awkwardly. Then he got up from the ground with dust all over his body and squatted on the ground. Everything just happened too quickly. Even with Guanying's ability, he did not have the time to fully accept and digest it. However, just when he was still feeling a little dizzy, a large foot kicked him in the same way as he did to himself. Guanying only saw a black shadow in front of him, and a pair of big feet came towards him. Out of instinct, he raised his arms to block. Bang! A powerful force suddenly hit him. With just one blow, Guanying felt as if his arms had fallen apart. His whole body was also pushed back by the huge force. During this process, even though his feet forcefully rubbed against the ground in an attempt to stop, the force was too great. Even the soles of his high-waisted cloth shoes were worn out, revealing the soles of his feet. His body still flew back 4 to 5 meters before coming to a stop. Just as his body stopped, the black shadow rushed over again. This was Beta Persei's hot pursuit. As Yang Chendong once said, "Take advantage of the enemy's weakness, take the enemy's life. Kindness to the enemy is cruelty to oneself." He had gained the upper hand with one move, and followed up with another attack. A pair of strong thick arms had already reached over, and his fists turned into palms. He grabbed Guanying's body, which was still in shock and dizzy. After 2 consecutive blows, Guanying had lost his previous accurate judgment, so Beta Persei easily grabbed his arms and lifted him up. When his body suddenly leaned back, Guanying's body was thrown into a backflip by the inertia. This backward somersault was completely unexpected, and it was not what Guanying wanted either. This blow caused his body to come into close contact with the ground. The moment he was bombarded to the ground, he only felt that his eyes were dazed, and his whole body was in discomfort as if it had fallen apart. Thanks to his usual training, his physical fitness was not bad. However, if it was anyone else, just this strike alone would have been enough to take their life. Even so, Guanying was completely stunned by the fall. He had no idea that his opponent, Beta Persei, had already gotten up and lifted a large foot to stomp on his waist. A person's waist was flexible, but at the same time, it was also very fragile. Once the 200 kilograms Beta Persei stepped on it, the consequences would be unimaginable. Even if they didn't lose their lives, they wouldn't be able to stand up for the rest of their lives. Fortunately, at this moment, Yang Chendong's voice suddenly rang out. "All right, stop." As soon as this voice rang out, Yang Er, who had a ferocious expression on his face, and was about to land his foot on the ground, suddenly froze. He stood there motionless, as if he was one of the 7 fairies who had been immobilized by Sun Wukong. After maintaining this posture for about a breath of time, the big foot moved to the side and came into close contact with the ground again. A short battle ended just like that. From the beginning to the end, Guanying was the first to take the initiative to attack. The rest of the time, he was on the defensive, and even took a beating. From this, it could be seen that the difference in strength between the two was huge. No one went to help Guanying up. They just let him lie on the ground and gasp for breath, his chest rising and falling one after another. This was the consequence of offending the 6th young master. If it wasn't for Yang Chendong's order, he would have lost his life by now. As time passed, no one spoke in the entire back garden, as if they were waiting for something. After about 10 breaths of time, Guaning finally moved. He struggled to sit up, and then slowly stood up with his arms supporting his body. However, at this moment, no matter how one looked at it, his body was somewhat bent, and it seemed that he had suffered some minor injuries. Standing up, Guaning turned to look at Yang Qindong. There was incomparable anger in his eyes, but also pity and sorrow. He couldn't beat him in a fight, and he couldn't talk through it. Regardless of whether it was wealth, power, status, or skill, the two sides were not on the same level. This made him feel a sense of inferiority. He finally realized that the mission Kuangya minister had given him was not going to be so easy to complete. You're not dead yet, right? If you're not dead, then stand there and listen to me. Didn't you want me to give you an explanation? Then I'll tell you right now. I am the imperial envoy, and it was your minister Kuangya who begged me to come. Since I am the general at the front, I naturally know what to do. I don't need anyone to teach me. Do you understand? Looking straight at Guaning, Yang Qindong's voice rang out in the courtyard. Yang Qindong was emphasizing his identity. Hearing this, Guaning instinctively nodded. Naturally, he knew these things. He also knew that as the imperial envoy and the general at the front personally appointed by the emperor, he did indeed have the power to do anything. He was angry that the other party didn't tell him what he was going to do and didn't discuss the matter of sending out the army. This made him feel a sense of inferiority. Guaning nodded. Yang Qindong continued. It's good that you know these things. As for killing Jiaping, as Zhaoqing general, he led the escape and caused the morale of the army to be in chaos. Tens of thousands of civilians were trapped in the city and killed by the bandits. Shouldn't he be killed for his actions? Han Qing, as an important official of the country, actually accepted bribes. It shouldn't be a problem to heavily punish him. The emperor has said that we can take the money for the mercenaries ourselves. This is just one way of taking it. Wanting the horse to run but not giving the horse grass, this is not something I can do. As for the matter of moving the army, this is a secret. If I publicly announce the plan, can you guarantee that the military plan will not be leaked? Will it not be known by the bandits? You should wake up. I have my own plans for what to do. As for whether you can understand or not, this is not my problem. It is your problem. If it must be said, it is you who is cooperating with me and not me who is cooperating with you. When you encounter a problem, it is best if you can think it through. If you can't, then think hard. If you can't think it through, you can go back to Nanjing and be an official of the Ministry of War. That will save you the trouble of worrying here. Yang Qindong's voice carried some severity. Those familiar with Yang Qindong knew that if he could be strict with you, it meant that he still thought highly of you. On the other hand, if he didn't even want you to do it, then he was truly giving up on you. That was the most fatal thing. After saying this to Han Qing, Yang Qindong waved his hand. He didn't care whether the other party understood or not. He said loudly, "Okay, today is the first time you barged in like this, and it will also be the last time. But if something like this happens again, I will take your life. You can leave now. I still want to listen to music. Don't disturb my mood." After saying this, Yang Qindong leaned his body against the rattan chair, and then slowly closed his eyes. Madame Shui, who was sitting beside Yang Qindong, saw her husband's behavior and couldn't help but smile. She then looked at Su Maner, who was still in shock, and said, "Miss Su, please continue." "Oh." Su Maner replied mechanically. Then, she readjusted her state of mind. After that, a pleasant voice came out from her mouth and entered Yang Qindong's ears, causing his expression to become one of enjoyment and joy once again. Amidst such a beautiful voice, Guaning dragged his injured body out of the back garden. Yang Qindong had finally given him an explanation. From the other party's words, he didn't seem to have gone overboard. As an imperial envoy, he had appeared in the unfamiliar environment of Guangdong. If he couldn't break through with his first 3 strikes, how could he make others listen to him? Looking at it now, he had done it. Now, speaking of the imperial envoy, from Liu Youfu to the insignificant officials who had seen this scene, all of them felt their hearts tremble. This made everyone pay extra attention to his orders. Wasn't this what Guaning himself had hoped to see before? He thought that perhaps this was the method of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. Now that the move had been used, it was up to whether or not he could really quell the rebels. In the rebel camp. In the government office of the former Zhaoqing Manor, Huang Yuliang was gathering his generals for a so-called military meeting. Ever since Yingzong was defeated at Tumu Fortress 2 years ago and lost 500,000 elite soldiers, the powerful Great Ming Dynasty began to decline. Zhu Qizhen, who had retreated to Nanjing, established the capital here and established the Southern Ming Dynasty. In order to fill the national treasury, the Southern Ming Dynasty added a lot of excessive taxes. When it fell on the commoners, it was unspeakably bitter, and the people had no way to make a living. It was under such circumstances that Huang Xiaoyang brought a group of brothers to start a peasant uprising in Guangdong. At the beginning of the uprising, they received the support of many poor commoners. The group expanded and took over a few counties, reaching a certain scale. At the same time, they were suppressed by the Southern Ming Dynasty. When faced with the Ming army coming from all directions, the unorganized peasant group was quickly calmed down. In the end, Huang Xiaoyang and his eldest son were both killed. Only his second son, Huang Yuliang, was left to escape and continue to fight against the Ming army on a small scale in Guangdong. There was constant encirclement and suppression. In such an environment, the space left for Huang Yuliang to survive became smaller and smaller. Just as he was about to be trapped, surrounded, and even destroyed, the Ming army that had surrounded him suddenly retreated by more than half. This sudden change made Huang Yuliang feel a sense of confusion. However, he immediately received news that the king of Minzhuang, Zhu Huixin, was rebelling in Yunnan. Not long after, he received a personal letter from the king of Minzhuang. The general idea was that he was willing to ally with him. They would help each other and work together. Chapter 361. Zhu Huihua's appearance messed up the situation and gave Huang Yuliang a chance to catch his breath. Using this chance, he finally stabilized his footing. The initial defense turned into a timely counterattack, and now the siege of the city. His army had expanded to 150,000 people, and the number of citizens under his rule had reached close to 1 million. In Zhaoqing Manor, after a round of fighting, smashing, looting, and burning, the place was in a mess. Even sitting in the manor, one could still smell the smell of burning houses in the air. Huang Yuliang sat on the main seat and casually glanced at his subordinates. He lightly knocked on the desk in front of him, and the noisy hall instantly quieted down. Everyone, we have conquered Zhaoqing. Our forces have expanded by another step. This is something worth celebrating. It is enough to prove that the Southern Ming Empire is rotten, and they are no match for us. Ha ha ha. These encouraging words made everyone in the hall burst into laughter. Almost all of them had arrogant looks on their faces at this moment. It was as if the world would soon be under their control. Huang Yuliang also laughed along with everyone, but he quickly stopped laughing. But Zhaoqing Manor is not our target. According to the plan discussed with Zhu Huihua, we need to conquer the Guangzhou Manor, and even the entire Guangdong province. Only then can we better suppress the Southern Ming Empire's military strength, make our name known, and expand our forces. So we need to keep advancing and advancing. Yes, we cannot be satisfied. There are more wealth and beauties waiting for us. We need to continue attacking. Geng Jun, the leader of the 4 heavenly kings, and the only one who followed young Master Huang to Zhaoqing Manor, stood up and agreed with Huang Yuliang. Well said, Heavenly King Geng's words are our next target. Reality has proven that the so-called Southern Ming Empire's army cannot withstand a single blow. But Huang Yuliang's voice trailed off. When everyone heard the word but, they could not help but perk up their ears. They knew that was the main point of today's meeting. However, there's a piece of bad news. Emperor Yingzong of the Ming Dynasty sent an imperial envoy to Guangzhou Prefecture. He's currently mobilizing troops and preparing to come to Guangzhou Prefecture. It seems like he intends to have a decisive battle with us. Huang Yuliang didn't let everyone wait for a long time. After keeping everyone in suspense, he told them the rest of the story. After saying this, he intentionally shrugged his shoulders. Oh right, I heard that the imperial envoy is the Great Ming's Duke of Loyalty. Oh, he's only 21 years old this year. As Huang Yuliang finished his last sentence, there was a burst of exhalation in the hall. Originally, when they heard that the Southern Ming Empire had sent a large army and an imperial envoy to fight with them, they were still a little nervous. No matter what, the Ming army's combat power was still very strong. In addition, the Ming army was very strong. If they really gathered their strength to counterattack, they would have to retreat. However, when they heard that the imperial envoy was a young man who was only 21 years old, they all laughed. Their faces, which had just become tense, completely relaxed at this moment. As for the great Ming's Duke of Loyalty, these people naturally ignored him. Perhaps in their eyes, the so-called nobility of the Ming dynasty was just someone who had a good life and came from a good family. They definitely wouldn't believe that such a person would have any ability. These people would overlook Yang Chendong and the Duke of Loyalty. Naturally, it was because of the lack of information. News was not smooth, public opinion was not developed, and Yang Chendong was only known around the capital of Baiming. In addition, Emperor Ingzong Zhu Qizhen intentionally downplayed this person's name. Yang Chendong's name was indeed not well known in the south. Without anyone knowing, these people naturally judged people based on their first impression of him. He was only a 21-year-old young man. How could he be in the eyes of these generals who relied on their own hard work to obtain results? Everyone had an indifferent expression, and Huang Yuliang also laughed along. He himself also didn't know much about Yang Chendong. Or rather, he didn't want to know. He was only a young man in his early 20s, so he didn't put him in his eyes. If it wasn't to motivate his subordinates, he probably wouldn't even mention a word about the sixth young master. Good brothers. The Southern Ming dynasty has no one. They actually sent a little kid to lead the army. Do they really think we are made of mud? Since it's like this, let's show them our strength and let them know how powerful we are. Huang Yuliang laughed loudly, raising everyone's morale. Young master is right. Since the Southern Ming dynasty dares to look down on us, we should show them our strength. The generals all became excited. The successive victories had made them lose themselves. This time, they were facing a young man, so they underestimated the enemy even more. At this time, not only the generals of the bandit army, even young master Huang Yuliang was very proud. Seeing everyone filled with righteous indignation, he felt that the morale of the army could be used, so he shouted loudly, "Good, since everyone has agreed, we will send troops to the Guangzhou Palace and capture the Ming Imperial Envoy alive." Send troops to the Guangzhou Palace and capture the Ming Imperial Envoy alive. The generals below followed Huang Yuliang's shout and shouted the slogan together. Their eyes were filled with longing and fantasy for a beautiful future. Under Huang Yuliang's call and strategy, the bandit army quickly gathered the rations they stole from various places and started to prepare to directly attack the Guangzhou Palace that had no obstacles in front of them. To them, if they took down this place, it was equivalent to taking over the entire Guangdong. When that time came, their influence would be even greater, and there would be even more heroes coming to join them. Guangzhou Palace. It had been 7 days since the last meeting in the big tent. In these 7 days, Yang Chendong refused to see anyone. Every day, he would listen to music and watch dances in the back garden of the palace. Even when Han Qing brought 400,000 liang of silver, it was his follower, Tiger's Mane, who was responsible for receiving it. When they arrived, it was like Mount Tai was pressing down on them. It gave people the feeling that the situation on the front line could not be delayed. Whoever dared to delay for even a moment would be killed. But after settling down, it was so quiet. It was as if the world was at peace and there was only pleasure and enjoyment left. This kind of contrast made many people unable to understand. However, due to the fact that Yang Chendong had killed Jia Ping and punished Han Qing, he was too ruthless. Although everyone couldn't figure it out, no one dared to ask. The entire situation seemed to have stopped here. Yang Chendong relied on the name of the imperial envoy and his decisive actions last time to make everyone feel afraid. No one dared to disturb him. In comparison, the Guangdong political commissioner, Liu Youfu, and General Guaning did not receive such treatment. The palace they were temporarily staying in was filled with people and carriages every day. Many people came to ask about how to deal with the upcoming battle. As the Guangdong political commissioner, Liu Youfu was more worried about the situation in Guangdong than anyone else. After all, if there was a big problem here, he would certainly be at fault. He had originally been shocked by Yang Qindong's methods when he first arrived. He thought that with such an imperial envoy, the Guangdong matter should not be difficult to resolve. But after 7 days there was suddenly no movement, and he couldn't sit still any longer. Until one day he suddenly received a battle report saying that Huang Yuliang's bandit army had already set out from Zhaoqing Palace. When the army's vanguard headed straight for the Guangzhou Palace, he could not sit still no matter what. Men, prepare horses. We are going to General Guan's palace. In General Guan's palace, Guaning was writing a battle report in his study. The so-called battle report was Guan Ying's daily report of the battle on the front line to the southern Ming court. If there was a battle and there were results, it could be reported twice a day, or even thrice a day. But now, even if it was a battle report a day, Guaning did not know how to write it. Speaking of which, Guaning was slightly different from normal generals in the army. He had studied before and had even become a Xiaocai. It was only because he had no hope of becoming a Xiaocai that he changed careers and joined the army. Because of his quick thinking and outstanding performance, he was recognized by Kuang Yi and was transferred into the military. It was not difficult for a Xiaocai to write a battle report. But now the same thing in his eyes was giving him a headache. He didn't want the emperor and minister Xie to worry, but he couldn't go against his will and report the war. Helpless, Guaning painfully wrote on the white paper that today was peaceful, the 3 armies didn't move, and everything was as usual. After writing this, he called for a personal attendant and had him report it to the relay station. After sitting down, Guaning stood in front of the window and moved his waist, which had not fully recovered from the injury. 7 days ago, after being taught a lesson by Beta Persei, he endured the pain in his waist and returned to the palace. Then he lay in bed for 3 days. Even the battle report was written on the bed. After 3 days he could get out of bed and walk. He had been looking forward to Yang Qindong's next move. But after waiting for another 4 days, there was still no movement. Gradually his heart, which had been calmed by Yang Qindong's words, became restless again. Standing in front of the window and thinking about what Yang Qindong had said to him, Guan Ying's expression became more and more confused. He admitted that after being taught a lesson that day, Yang Qindong's words were not wrong. Since it was a military secret, the more confidential it was, the better. After all, Guangdong had lost 5 major cities in a row. If one were to say that there were no bandit spies in the government, even he himself would not believe it. Chapter 362. However, if it was just to prevent spies from eavesdropping on military intelligence, would he still be able to win this battle if he didn't move? Could it be that Yang Qindong came here just for fun? Or did he really have a card up his sleeve, and already made all kinds of arrangements? When he thought about how the great Ming Dynasty's army, other than the Canton 1,000 guards brought by Liu Youfu, who was still in Guangzhou, the rest of the great Ming Dynasty's army had been sent out, and many of the mercenaries had also been sent out, he felt a little relieved. Perhaps this Duke of Loyalty had already made arrangements. Guaning was still comforting himself. He thought that since Yang Qindong was able to stay so calmly in Guangzhou, he must have made some preparations. Just as he was thinking, the sound of hurried footsteps suddenly came from outside the study. Then an attendant's voice sounded. "General Liu Youfu is here. He said he has important military intelligence and must see you." Important military intelligence? Hearing this, Guan Ying's expression became tense. "Okay, I'll go over right now." In the main hall of the Guan residence, Guaning saw Liu Youfu, who was burning with anxiety. "Liu Youfu, why are you so anxious? Has Lady Jia's 500,000 taels of silver arrived?" The reason why Guaning brought up the matter of the 500,000 taels of silver was because the imperial envoy's manor had let out word that when Jiashi's silver arrived, he would only receive guests. Otherwise, even if the sky fell, he was not to be disturbed. Guaning naturally didn't believe this statement. Once there was a military emergency, if Yang Qindong still didn't do anything, it would be a major dereliction of duty. At that time, his position as imperial envoy would be removed. Not only that, but the emperor and minister Kuang probably wouldn't let him off easily. However, even though he knew that this was just an excuse, Guanning still hoped that this matter could be settled as soon as possible. After all, once the matter was settled, Yang Qindong would have no reason to refuse to see them. He could also fulfill his duty and urge them to hurry up. General Guan, it's not that Lady Jia's silver has arrived. I've already urged them there. Instead, news came from Zhaoqing residence. The bandit leader Huang Yuliang has already brought 80,000 soldiers to the Guangzhou residence. The situation is critical, Lu Youfu said with an anxious expression. There's such a thing? When did it happen? This was the first time Guanning had heard of such a thing. He couldn't help but ask with some doubt. It can't be wrong. This was sent back by the spies I've planted among the bandits. I'm sure the official report will be sent over soon, Lu Youfu said firmly. Since the rebels were able to plant informants in the government, Lu Youfu, as the Guangdong political commissioner, planting an informant in the other party was a reasonable matter. Guanning no longer doubted this point. Instead, he nodded. This is an important matter. How about this? I will have to trouble Sir Lu to go with me to see the imperial envoy. Of course. Lu Youfu nodded. This time, he came to persuade Guanning to meet Yang Qindong with him. 7 days ago, General Guan had barged into the residence of the imperial envoy and was subsequently beaten. He had long heard the news. Guanning was Minister Kuang Ye's favorite. If Yang Qindong could beat up such a person, he really didn't have the guts to break into the mansion. Guanning agreed. After having a companion, Lu Youfu also had some confidence. Immediately, the two of them left the manor together and headed straight for Yang Qindong's residence. The two of them, one on a horse and one in a sedan, quickly arrived outside the temporary Yang Manor in the city. However, without any surprise, they were met with a closed door. Yang Wu, who was guarding the door, stopped the two of them. When he heard them say that they had important battle reports to report, he shook his head. Sirs, I am truly sorry. You know the Duke's temper. Since he said that before Jiashi's silver is delivered, no one is allowed to come and disturb him. Even if the sky falls, he won't see you. Brother, please report. This is indeed an urgent military situation. If something happens, I'm afraid you won't be able to take responsibility. Lu Youfu saw that even a doorman could stop him. He was unhappy in his heart and spoke with a threatening tone. There's nothing I can't take responsibility for. Since the Duke asked me to guard the door, I must abide by the rules set. Please return. Yang Wu was not angry at Lu Youfu's words. On the contrary, he said this with a smile on his face. However, this smile at this moment seemed to be asking for a beating. Lu Youfu didn't have any good ideas. He could only look at Guanning for help, hoping that he would speak up. If it really didn't work, he would try to break in. However, Guan Ying's performance was truly disappointing. Seeing that Yang Wu was blocking him, he simply turned around and left. Only then did his voice travel out. All right, if possible, please inform the imperial envoy that the Jia's silver will arrive very soon. However, the front line is indeed in a state of emergency. If something really happens to the Guangzhou prefecture, I'm afraid no one will be able to bear such a responsibility. Take care, I won't see you out. Yang Wu acted as if he didn't hear Guan Ying's words and was still smiling. Then his gaze fell on Lu Youfu and pretended to be puzzled. It was as if he was asking, "What's wrong? Is this lord not leaving?" Lu Youfu saw the meaning in Yang Wu's eyes and left angrily with a flick of his sleeve. No matter what, he was still Guangdong's chief political envoy, a second-grade official in the imperial court, and an existence similar to that of a feudal official. Who would normally dare to give him such a look? However, considering that Yang Qindong's methods were a little too rough, he didn't have the guts to barge in. He could only resentfully chase after Guanning, who was about to leave. General Guan, are we not going to report this matter to the imperial envoy? Don't report it first. Let's think of a way to send Jiashi's silver over first. Guanning lightly shook his head. Then he turned around to look at the Yang Manor and left. He had already decided that when he returned, he would write a battle report against Yang Qindong. Inside the Yang Manor, after Yang Wu sent off Guanning and Lu Youfu, he came here. When he saw Yang Chendong, he reported everything that happened outside. Good, I got it. You did well. Yang Chendong first smiled, and then said with satisfaction. After Yang Wu left happily, he looked at Yang San who was in the study and said, It seems that they also arranged spies among the bandits. The news is actually not much later than ours. Yes, it should be Lu Youfu's doing. It seems that this person is not muddle-headed. Yang San nodded in agreement. Just 2 hours ago, he had already received a report from his spies among the bandits and immediately reported it to Yang Chendong. This was also why Yang Chendong dared to refuse Lu Youfu and Guan Ying's visit even though he knew that they had a military report. It's just that they are not muddle-headed. They have limited military strength and limited military resources. Even if they want to do something, there are inevitably too many people holding them back. In the end, it's still difficult to stretch out their hands and feet. Yang Chendong commented on Lu Youfu's weakness, or it could be said that it was the weakness of the entire southern Ming dynasty. No one would believe that the dignified great Ming dynasty did not have any talents. It was just that because of the restrictions of the environment, it was difficult for people with abilities to stretch out their hands and feet. It was just like how if a young person did not experience some hardships and enough experience, how could they be entrusted with important tasks? When they really made a name for themselves, they would probably already be an old person. At that time, the edges of struggle would have been smoothed out, and their will would not be as high. They would naturally learn the principle of subservience. When a young person wanted to stand out, they would also habitually suppress them. This was a kind of cycle. In this way, each generation was worse than the previous. The dynasty would naturally decline more and more, and it would not be far from a change of dynasty. Sighing that the great Ming dynasty was going downhill from prosperity, Yang San, who was standing on the side, said carefully, Young master, we found some unexpected circumstances regarding Miss Su's matter. Unexpected circumstances? Tell me. Yang Chendong's interest was piqued. He had always been curious about why Su Maner would appear by his side. Since she was the #1 courtesan by the Qinhuai River, she naturally did not lack money. If she was willing, it would not be difficult for her to marry into a noble or minister's family as a concubine. However, she just had to appear by his side, and did not seem to want to leave. Why exactly was this? Through observation, Yang Chendong discovered that the other party did not worship him much. This could be felt from the first time they met. If it was not worship, it was even more illogical for him to act like this. This was why he ordered the Security Bureau to investigate this woman's background properly. He even emphasized that they had to start from her background and the people she came into contact with. Yes. Yang San first nodded in agreement, then said in a very careful voice, Young master, according to your instructions, we first started from Miss Su's background. It was from there that we found out the difference. Although there were many rumors about her background, we finally found out that Miss Su actually came from an official's family. Her grandfather was once the left assistant minister of the Nanjing 6th Ministry of Rights. His surname was Su and his name was Cheng. He was extremely talented. Su Cheng? Recalling this name in his mind, Yang Chendong nodded. That's right. I know this person Su Cheng. He is indeed talented. He was even praised by Zhu Di, the founder of the Ming dynasty. That's right. We also found out that this Su Cheng originally wanted to be transferred from Nanjing to Beijing to be an official. However, perhaps because his performance was too stunning, not long after, he was found guilty of bribery and corruption. Not long after, he died in prison. Then his family was sent away. Miss Su was in this family. However, her luck was not bad. At that time, she was not in the Su residence but in the countryside. Thus she avoided disaster. That's right. The person who accused Su Cheng at that time was the current Minister of Rights of the Southern Ming Dynasty, Lu Da. Lu Da? Interesting. When he heard this, Yang Chendong's lips curled into a smile. Chapter 363. That's all we've found out for now. After all, Lu Da is now the Minister of Rights. He has a high position, and is not easy to investigate. Our people will make the best use of the time. Young master, please wait for a while. Seeing that Yang Chendong was satisfied, Yang San heaved a sigh of relief. Although Yang Chendong did not mention Su Muner's matter, he definitely placed great importance on it. Otherwise, this girl would not have been able to stay in the Yang residence. This also put a lot of pressure on Yang San. However, when the matter reached Luda, it stopped. Firstly, it was because the other party had a lot of power. If they were not careful, they might be targeted. Secondly, it had been so many years. Many things had changed. It would be very difficult to investigate. The two difficulties were very small. Only then did Yang San feel a huge increase in pressure. And this matter is indeed not easy to investigate. However, it still needs to be investigated as soon as possible. How about this? Give 100,000 taels of silver to the Nanjing branch, and let them get to the bottom of this matter. Yang Chendong understood Yang San's difficulty. However, the Security Bureau was supposed to do things that others could not do. As long as the investment was huge, it was believed that anything could be uncovered. Not to mention, Su Cheng was the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights. That was a third-rank official. It was not something that could be done with just one or two people working together. As long as they put in the effort, they should be able to find some clues. Adding on 100,000 taels of silver, it was enough to see how important this matter was to Yang Chendong. Yang San nodded heavily. Young master, don't worry. I will arrange it now and strive for an early result. Guaning and Lu Youfu returned after hitting a wall. After the two of them discussed, they decided to take a roundabout approach. They thought of a way to settle the Jia family's matter first. This way, Yang Chendong would not be able to find an excuse to not meet them. Lu Youfu was anxious. He gave the order and naturally had his trusted subordinates to handle this matter. In order to protect themselves, the Jia family did not have the protection of an official like Jia Ping. When Lu Youfu's pressure came, they could only be at his mercy. Speaking of which, the Jia family in Guangdong was considered a large family, but their main focus was on business. In the Great Ming Dynasty, the status of merchants had never been high. They were like a piece of fat meat that anyone with power could take a bite out of at any time. They clearly saw this weakness, so they worked hard to cultivate talents. That was why they had Jia Ping as a general. Although he was only a fourth-grade military officer, he was still considered a member of the bureaucracy. When he did some things, he had some confidence. Unfortunately, this confidence was destroyed by Yang Chendong's appearance as an example to others. After the Jia clan lost their backing and Lu Youfu's pressure, they quickly gave in. The 500,000 taels of silver were delivered to Gan province in just 5 days. When the silver finally arrived, Lu Youfu excitedly called Guaning to go with him to the Yang residence. They wanted to see what excuse the imperial envoy would have to not see them this time. To their surprise, when they appeared in front of the Yang mansion with their personal attendants, Yang Wu, who they had seen last time, had a beaming smile on his face. He even opened the mansion's doors wide and welcomed them warmly. Seeing this reality, Lu Youfu couldn't help but lightly snort. Then he and Guaning walked into the Yang residence and arrived at the main hall. Not long after, Yang Chendong walked in under the protection of Tiger's mane and Beta Persei. As soon as he entered, he smiled and cupped his hands. 1 tael of silver is not bad. This matter has truly been hard on the two of you. Yang Chendong had once served as the Northern Ming's General of Agile Cavalry, which was a second-rank military official position. He himself was also a loyal Duke of the Great Ming. In addition, he was currently serving as an imperial envoy. When he was this polite, the two people had no choice but to promptly stand up and cup their fists to return the greeting. Imperial Envoy Darren is too polite. Please take a seat, please take a seat. Alas, when it comes to silver, this Imperial Envoy is also very helpless. I'm afraid you also know that this time, we came to Guangdong on the Emperor's orders to quell the rebellion. The National Treasury did not give us a single tael of silver. It said that before the 3 armies move, the provisions move first. What should this imperial envoy do? Fortunately, Qiao Shangshu was there to help. After reporting to the emperor, the imperial edict allowed them to raise their own silver taels. Moreover, he also said that anything related to the rebel army could be taken away as well. Haha, this was indeed the emperor's boundless benevolence, showing compassion for the people of our generation. Although Jia Ping is a general of the Great Ming, he was defeated at the hands of the rebel army and lost a city. This can be considered a heinous crime. You two won't have any objections to taking 500,000 taels of silver from him, right? It seemed like an explanation, but in reality, Yang Chendong was using these words to tell Lu Youfu and Guaning that he had an imperial edict to follow for taking the silver. Even if they objected, they could not do anything. Furthermore, in the future, this kind of thing could happen at any time. When Lu Youfu and Guaning heard this, how could they not understand? In their hearts, they did not like Yang Chendong's greed. However, when they thought about the current crisis of the war, it was not the time to talk about this. As long as they could quell the rebels, what was wrong with letting him take advantage of them? Immediately, the two of them cupped their hands expressionlessly. They stood and said, "Imperial Envoy Darren is joking. Since the Emperor has allowed it, we will do our best to cooperate." Good. With the two of you saying these words, this Imperial Envoy's heart can be at ease. Oh, that's right. The two of you probably didn't come just to give me silver, right? Is there anything else? Yang Chendong's face carried a smile, and his attitude became warmer as he spoke. Finally, they could talk about the main topic. Lu Youfu, who had been unable to restrain himself for a long time, stood up 3 times and cupped his hands to say, "Imperial Envoy Darren, the Yellow Bandit Army has already moved from Zhaoqing Manor to Guangzhou Manor. Currently, they have surrounded the city and are attacking the city. The situation is truly critical. I ask Imperial Envoy Darren to quickly dispatch troops to relieve the siege of Guangzhou." That's right, Guangzhou Manor is in imminent danger. Does the Imperial Envoy have any plans to deal with it? Guaning also stood up and asked with a hidden meaning in his words. In regards to Yang Chendong's lack of action these days, Guaning had already reached his limit. In his opinion, this person who was rumored to have the military god's nickname did not have the ability to strategize like he thought. He only knew how to listen to music and watch dances every day. He completely had the image of a young master who enjoyed himself. He really couldn't understand why Kuang Shangshu had chosen him in the beginning. Guangzhou Manor had already been surrounded for a few days. He wanted to see how this situation was resolved. If it couldn't be resolved, how could he explain it to his superiors? Lu Youfu was Guangdong's political envoy, and had just been appointed. He was worried about his position and future, so he spoke with a pleading tone. Guaning was the representative of the Ministry of War. He was more concerned about the overall situation. Therefore, he was somewhat disappointed with Yang Chendong. When he spoke, it was more of a questioning tone. When these two different attitudes were put pressure on Yang Chen, the atmosphere in the room became somewhat oppressive. Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei, who were standing behind him, were the first to react. They stared fiercely at the two people who were speaking with a pair of tiger eyes. Looking at them, it seemed that once Yang Chendong gave the order, they would fight. The atmosphere suddenly solidified, and Lu Youfu's heart became cold. He felt that Tiger's Mane's gaze had been fixed on him, like a dormant poisonous snake. It seemed that at any time, he could jump up and attack him. He couldn't help but feel some regret. If he had known earlier, he would have brought 2 of his personal guards in. If he had truly angered the capricious imperial envoy, at least he would have had room to maneuver. Guaning, on the other hand, felt Beta Persei's gaze fiercely staring at him, so he also glared back. Although they had already exchanged blows and he knew that he was not the other party's opponent, a soldier could be killed but not humiliated. This time, even if he was going to be killed here, he couldn't have the slightest timidity. He was an official of the Southern Ming Empire, and he was a general. How could he shrink back, because of fear of the enemy? The 4 gazes were different. Because of these variables, there was an additional trace of murderous intent in the air. The entire room became extremely quiet because of this. All this until Yang Chendong spoke again. Oh, could it be that the city of Guangzhou has already been breached? Lu Youfu didn't know why Yang Chendong asked this, but out of truth he still shook his head and said, "No, the commander of the Guangdong Guards, General Ma Wei, is currently leading troops to defend the city. It hasn't been breached yet. Since it hasn't been breached, why are you so nervous? Yang Chendong's sudden rhetorical question made it seem like he was stating something. This caused Lu Youfu to be stunned. Yes, the city hasn't been breached yet. Why are Guanyin and I so pressuring? Guanyin also became uneasy because of these words. Then he suddenly thought of something. The original questioning in his eyes retreated a lot, and he asked in a consulting manner, "Please teach me, Imperial Envoy." Teach you? There's nothing to teach. The truth is placed in front of us. Previously, when I sent Commander Ma Wei back to Guangzhou, I told him that once the yellow bandits attack the city, he must defend the city for 10 days. Once the time is up, he can abandon the city and leave. All of the responsibility will be on me. Presumably, it hasn't been 10 days yet. Yang Chendong looked at Guanyin and spoke in a rhetorical manner. No, it's only been 4 days until today. Guanyin reported the truth. It's only been 4 days, so there are still 6 days. Yes, if we go straight from Ganzhou to Guangzhou, 6 days is enough. There's still time. How about this? Tonight the two of you will stay in the Yang Manor for a family feast. Tomorrow morning, our army will depart from here toward Guangzhou. How about that? Yang Chendong's expression was full of confidence. It seemed like he was consulting, but it was more like he was informing. After saying this, he didn't wait for Lu Youfu and Guanyin to reply. Instead, he turned to Tiger's Mane behind him and said, "Go inform the two madams to arrange a family feast. Also, inform Miss Su to prepare a song and dance. Tonight, I will be entertaining important guests." Chapter 364. In the face of a great enemy, no one would be in the mood to attend the banquet. However, considering that this was Yang Chendong's kindness, they could use this opportunity to ease the tension between the two sides. They could also test the other party's thoughts and preparations. After looking at each other, they cupped their fists and replied, "Then we will have to trouble the Imperial Envoy." No trouble, no trouble. Please be punctual for the banquet tonight. Now you can go back and make the arrangements. Tomorrow morning, we will leave Ganzhou and depart for the Guangzhou prefecture. Yang Chendong laughed loudly as if the matter had already been resolved. No matter what, they could finally send out their troops. When Lu Youfu and Guanyin left the Yang Manor, there was a hint of joy on their faces. However, when the two returned to the Ganzhou Yamen and prepared to mobilize the troops and make preparations for war, they sadly realized that they only had 1,000 guards to mobilize. In other words, they only had 1,000 soldiers that could go to war. Although there was 1,000 guards outside the Ganzhou prefecture that was responsible for security, they could still mobilize them with their identities. However, if they mobilized them, how would they deal with the Ganzhou prefecture when it was in danger? For a moment, the two could not help but worry. According to the battle report from the front lines, the Yellow Bandit Army had 80,000 men. This was not all of their military strength. There were also large armies causing trouble in other places. Although General Ma Wei was in the Guangzhou prefecture, there was a Guangdong Guard and 1,000 guards, with a total of 7,000 soldiers. It was already difficult to defend the city. It was impossible for them to go out of the city and counterattack. In this case, what could they do with the 1,000 men in their hands? Feeling that they did not have enough military strength, Lu Youfu looked at Guanyin, who was following beside him, and asked, "General Guan, do you know where the soldiers from the Pingyue prefecture and Shaozhou prefecture went?" "I don't know." Guanyin shook his head and said straightforwardly. He had asked Yang Chendong about this before, and was dismissed with a casual sentence of military secrets. "I don't know." This answer clearly made Lu Youfu unhappy. However, Guanyin was sent by the Ministry of War. Although Guanying's position was not as high as his, he was not his subordinate. He could not casually reprimand him. Even if he had anger in his heart, he could not vent it. "It seems that I can only ask the Imperial Envoy during the banquet tonight. Sai, it's impossible to do anything with just this 1,000 guards institute. Even if we throw them onto the battlefield, I'm afraid they won't be able to do anything." Lu Youfu could not be blamed for shaking his head. What he knew was that although the Yellow Bandits' combat power was average, they would not be a match for the Ming army even if they were to fight one-on-one. However, the difference between 1,000 and 80,000 was too great. He had no chance of winning at all. The two of them, who were originally in a good mood, thus dissipated. They only went about official business and called the 1,000-man commander of the 1,000 Guards Institute over. After making arrangements for the army to depart for Guangzhou tomorrow, they began to look forward to the banquet in the evening. The moonlight tonight was quite good. The moon hung high in the sky, illuminating the entire earth. It was as if the world was covered with a layer of mysterious white veil. When the hour of the 5 arrived, Lu Youfu sat in a sedan chair, Guaning rode a horse. The two groups arrived in front of the Yang mansion. Red lanterns were hung high in the air, creating a festive atmosphere. The two of them, who had something on their minds, were not in the mood to look at the scenery. With dark faces, they were led by Yang Wu to the banquet hall of the Yang mansion. Yang Chendong did not put on any airs. He had already taken his 2 wives to sit at the banquet. The only difference was that Hu Yan and Lady Shui's faces were covered with a veil. This was also due to the system of the time. It was not easy for women to appear in public. "Come, Sir Lu, General Guan, please sit. Haha, welcome to my family banquet. This time, we will only talk about friendship and not official business." Yang Chendong, with a smile, warmly greeted the 2 people who came in. However, when he said they could not talk about official business, it was clear that Lu Youfu and Guan Ying's expressions became ugly. After saying this, he did not wait for the other party to reply. He turned his head and smiled. "Come, please invite Miss Su." After saying this, he turned his head and said to Lu Youfu and Guan Ying, "Sirs, would you like to listen to a new song I made?" They were going to go to war tomorrow. The two of them had no intention of offending Yang Chendong. They would go along with what he said first. It would not be too late to find an opportunity to ask about the war later. Su Maner came out. She had a slender waist, an exquisite figure, and exquisite facial features. The moment she appeared, Lu Youfu, who had once seen her from afar, widened his eyes at this moment. He stared at her without blinking. He had to admit that this woman could indeed be said to have a fatal attraction to men. Hu Yan's beauty lay in her quiet elegance. Madame Shui's beauty lay in her enchanting temperament. Su Maner, on the other hand, vividly displayed the gentle side of a woman from Jiangnan's water villages. Each had their own merits and characteristics. A maid had already placed the guzheng. When Su Maner walked over leisurely, she first bowed to Yang Chendong and the others. Then she pulled up her skirt and sat down. Then she said in a very pleasant voice, "Sirs, I am not talented, but I would like to present Sword and Saber Are Like a Dream. Please appreciate it." After saying this, Su Maner gently raised her arm. Then, her slender fingers landed on the guzheng. A beautiful tune that was like the sound of nature rang out in the courtyard, and drilled into the ears of everyone present. The prelude was not very long, but it had already attracted everyone's attention. Yang Chendong had closed his eyes long ago. He had an expression of great enjoyment. Then the beautiful sound of Su Maner playing and singing by herself rang out in their ears. "Where does my sword go? Love and hate, it's hard to be alone. My saber cuts through the sky. Right and wrong, I know but also don't know. I'm drunk, everything is hazy." It was really a good tune and good lyrics. This Sword and Saber Are Like a Dream was very suitable for playing the guzheng. After Yang Chendong listened to all the songs played by Su Maner these few days, he gave her this song. She had long heard that Yang Chendong had the title of Eastern Commander, and was extremely talented. Now that she could finally receive a song personally bestowed by him, Su Maner felt as if she had received a treasure. With her talent in this area, the song was completed after just one night. Now that it was sung by her, the woman's voice had a hint of heroism to it, making it even more beautiful. Even Lu Youfu and Guaning were shocked by this song at this moment. They were quickly immersed in it with a look of enjoyment on their faces. Even if they were scholars, they might not be proficient in songs, but they would definitely listen and appreciate them. Now that they heard Sword and Saber Are Like a Dream, they really admired it. Soon, they revealed expressions of enjoyment similar to Yang Chendong's. When the song ended and the sound of the guzheng was still reverberating in the courtyard, the two of them opened their eyes reluctantly. At this moment, Yang Chendong's words were transmitted into their ears. Haha, Miss Su is indeed amazing. I'm afraid that only you can perform this song so wonderfully. All of this is thanks to the Emperor's grace, allowing Miss Su to come to this imperial envoy's side. Su Maner, who originally had a humble expression, had to reveal an expression of guilt. But when she suddenly heard Yang Chendong's words, her expression tensed up and a hint of panic flashed across her face. The Emperor? Lu Youfu was listening enthusiastically. Suddenly, when he heard Yang Chendong mention the Emperor, his face was filled with confusion. On the other hand, Guan Ying's expression was extremely normal. It was obvious that he had already known about this matter. Noticing Lu Youfu's shocked expression, Yang Chendong smiled and said, Lord Lu, it's like this. This time, the Emperor appointed me as an imperial envoy to quell the rebels in Guangdong. Because he considered that I am young and impetuous, he was afraid that I would be too lonely on the road and wouldn't be able to find anything fun. Thus, he invited Miss Su to accompany me. Sigh, this heart of sympathy really makes this subject feel fearful. So that's how it is. The Emperor's imperial favor to the imperial envoy is truly enviable, truly enviable. Lu Youfu nodded his head as if he had just realized something. Then he said a few flattering words. These words naturally caused Yang Chendong's expression to become complacent. However, what made people disappointed was that Su Maner suddenly stood up and bowed. 3 sirs, I am truly sorry. This servant suddenly feels unwell. Please excuse me. Her bashful appearance gave people a feeling of pity. How could such a request not be allowed? Yang Chendong immediately nodded his head and said, Since you are feeling unwell, you should go and rest. I believe that the 2 sirs won't blame you. Of course, of course. We still have to thank Miss Su for bringing us such beautiful music. Lu Youfu immediately expressed his position. From his point of view, this was clearly Yang Chendong exposing everything. No matter what, Su Maner was still a girl. Of course, she would feel embarrassed. Although Guaning didn't say it, he also had the same thought. However, although Yang Chendong had a smile on his face, he was a little more cautious in his heart. He had originally wanted to sound her out. By publicly revealing that Su Maner was sent by the Emperor, he also wanted to keep a close eye on this matter. In this way, if she wanted to do anything to him, it would represent Zhu Qizhen's intention. He didn't expect that after this test, this girl would indeed be unable to keep her composure. Although she seemed to want to retreat with a bashful expression. Who knew if it was because of a guilty conscience? In any case, the probing this time was effective. Just as Su Maner brought her maid Xiao Yun and turned to leave, Yang Chendong inadvertently glanced at the deputy chief of the security bureau, Yang San, who was hiding in the dark, also left with them. However, because this action was done very discreetly, no one noticed it. Come, have a taste of this imperial envoy's cooking. Let me tell you, this is something we can't buy even if we spend money on a normal day. Yang Chendong's gaze turned and landed on Lu Youfu and Guaning, looking like a host receiving guests. Good. I have long heard that the imperial envoy has an expert chef by his side. This time, if I have the chance, I will have a good taste. Lu Youfu immediately said politely. As for whether he believed these words in his heart, that was another matter. Chapter 365. Su Maner brought her maid, Xiao Yun, and quickly returned to her courtyard. After that, Xiao Yun dismissed all the maids who were serving here. When only the master and servant were left, she anxiously said, Young miss, how did he know that you were sent by the Emperor? Could it be that Lord Guaning said it? It shouldn't be. At this moment, Su Maner had already regained her calm demeanor. However, her eyes were wrinkled, showing that she indeed had something on her mind. If it wasn't Lord Guan who said it, then who could have told him? Xiao Yun said with a worried expression. She had been by Su Maner's side since she was only 8 years old. Rather than calling her a maid, it would be more appropriate to call her a sister. Usually, the young miss would not hide anything from her. Naturally, She already knew about Suma Nair's appearance here, and what she wanted to do a while ago. In the beginning, Suma Nair had even made the decision to let her leave. However, she was rejected by Xiao Yun. In her words, she and young Miss were already as close as family. They should go through thick and thin together. The more important excuse was that once she left, it would be hard to avoid suspicion. Moreover, this matter was caused by the emperor. Without permission, she would not be able to leave even if she wanted to. Suma Nair was naturally very touched by Xiao Yun's unwavering loyalty. However, when she thought of the benefits she could obtain after the matter was completed, she finally made up her mind to continue with the matter. However, she felt a little guilty that she might have implicated Xiao Yun. Now, in the face of Xiao Yun's question of who told Yang Chendong that she was sent by the emperor, Suma Nair shook her head lightly. Now is not the time to pursue these matters. There is no point in doing so. What's important is how he sees it, and whether he will be wary of us. If that's the case, I'm afraid that we will have to be extra careful with our every move. After all, you can see from our interactions these days that he is not simple. He might even be much smarter than we imagined. Although the two of them did not mention who he was, this name had long been understood. Other than Yang Chendong, who else could it be? Thinking of Yang Chendong, thinking of his talent and youth, Xiao Yun couldn't help but be moved as she said, "Miss, do we really have to do that? I think he's quite nice. If we give up on the plan and tell him everything, do you think he'll protect us?" Protect us? After Suma Nair heard this, she shook her head. Under the heavens, all lands belong to the emperor. We are just women. We just have some good looks. Who do you think would offend the emperor for us? Besides, it's not like you don't know that I'm not afraid of death. What I want is results. That way, even if I die in the underworld, I can still laugh. On the other hand, if you can't do it, even if you continue to live, what's the difference between you and a walking corpse? As if she had said something sad, Suma Nair's eyes revealed a sorrowful expression. Miss, don't think so much. For your peace of mind, we'll just continue to do it. At most, we'll just die together. In the next life, we can still be good sisters. Xiao Yun looked at Suma Nair's sad expression and couldn't help but say this. Good sister. Suma Nair looked at Xiao Yun with heartache. Then the two of them hugged each other and cried bitterly. Other than the sound of crying, there was no other movement in the room. A black shadow by the window quietly left without anyone noticing. In the main hall, Lu Youfu and Guaning had eaten quite a lot. The kitchen maid, Yi Qiu'er, had been with Yang Chendong for quite some time. Under various strict requirements, her culinary skills had become better and better. In addition, with the help of various high-quality condiments that she didn't have at that time, the food that she made was indeed extraordinarily delicious. On this point, even Lu Youfu and Guaning couldn't help but be convinced. The two of them also ate quite a lot and drank quite a bit of wine. During the banquet, the two of them had also asked about the war. However, Yang Chendong casually waved his hand. It's fine. There won't be any problems in the Guangzhou prefecture. General Ma Wei has guaranteed that we can hold on for 10 days. You can rest assured. All right, I said we won't talk about official matters. Come, let's drink. Although he said they wouldn't talk about it, Yang Chendong still gave the two of them a reassuring pill. Regardless of whether his words were trustworthy, since things had already come to this point. Even if they had some worries and doubts in their hearts, it was useless. They might as well relax a little and drink while they had the wine. It didn't take long for the three of them to drink quite a lot. When they walked out of the Yang residence, Lu Youfu's body was a little shaky. Yang Chendong also looked like he had drunk too much. He had someone send them out of the residence. Without any outsiders, he quickly regained his calm appearance. This was his residence. The wine he drank had already been replaced with soft drinks. As such, other than feeling a little bloated, how could he be drunk? Since he wasn't drunk, he didn't immediately return to the bedroom to rest. Instead, he went to the study and saw Yang San, who had been waiting for him. When Yang San saw Yang Chendong, he came forward and said nervously and worriedly, "Young master, I heard some things. However, they didn't say much. I just felt that they seemed to want to harm you." "What's going on?" Yang Chendong's expression turned a little ugly. It seemed that the worst outcome had happened. Yang Sen didn't dare to hide anything. He told him everything that he had secretly heard of the conversation between the two girls. Then, he looked at Yang Chendong carefully and waited for the young master's orders. What do you think? Yang Chendong first closed his eyes and transmitted some of the information that he had heard. Then he opened his eyes and looked at Yang San. Young master, from what I see, these two girls obviously came with the intention to die. Although I don't know what they will choose to do, they definitely want to harm you. Since that's the case, why don't we just capture them and interrogate them? I'm not afraid that they won't tell us their purpose. Yang Sen made a grabbing motion. No. Yang Chendong rejected. If they really want to harm the young master, and they are here on orders, it won't help even if we capture them. If the mastermind's plan doesn't work, he will definitely come up with another plan. Instead of being on guard, why don't we just keep them and keep an eye on them? Young master, you are right. Since that's the case, I will send people to keep an eye on them. I will also send people to investigate and try to find out the truth. Yang San felt that Yang San's words made sense and nodded in agreement. Yes, it is necessary to investigate. However, if they are really here on orders from the emperor, there won't be many people who know about this matter. If that's the case, it will be very difficult to find out the truth. How about this? Make the arrangements. If you can investigate, investigate. If you can't, just let them go. Don't let them be on guard and alert them. Yang Chendong wouldn't underestimate anyone, not to mention Zhu Qizhen. Even if he was the emperor, he should have capable people by his side. Although the spies of the Security Bureau were very powerful, they couldn't cover everything. He didn't want their actions to cause Zong to be on guard. Not only would they lose their brothers, but they would also change their strategy. Understood. I thank the young master for your concern on behalf of my brothers. Yang San said sincerely with a face full of gratitude. The next morning, the people of the Yang residence packed up their things and left Guangzhou City. They met up with the Cold Front Battalion outside the city. The 1st and 3rd Battalions of the Cold Front Battalion were transferred away one after another. Only the 2nd Battalion and the direct subordinates led by Commander Luo Po were left, totaling 400 people. As for the auxiliary soldiers, 4 battalions were transferred away. There was an ordinary battalion with 300 people, and a reinforced battalion with 500 people, totaling up to 800 people. The mercenaries were left with 1,200 people. Lu Youfu and Guaning only had 1,000 soldiers with them. Both sides added up to 2,200 people. Looking at the pitiful number of soldiers, the officials of the Great Ming Dynasty were worried. In their minds, with only 2,000 soldiers, not to mention solving the crisis in Guangzhou, if they were to encounter the yellow bandits, it was unknown whether they would be able to escape alive. Very good, it's enough. On the other hand, Yang Chendong looked at the advancing troops that were constantly passing by and nodded his head in satisfaction. He even jokingly said to Lu Youfu and Guaning, who were following beside him, "It's good to have fewer people. They are more mobile and can move faster. They don't have to bring so much military supplies and fodder. It saves a lot of trouble." Yes, as the imperial envoy says, it is true. Lu Youfu agreed with a bitter expression. However, in his heart, he thought that the only benefit of fewer people was that once they encountered an enemy, they could escape faster and would not be encumbered. Just as Yang Chendong said, they had more mobility. Regardless of what other people thought, Yang Chendong would not explain anything to them. After seeing the army depart as scheduled, he returned to the luxurious carriage to rest. If he could sit, he would not stand. If he could lie down, he would not sit. Once Yang Chendong entered the carriage, he quickly fell asleep under the care of Hu Yan and Lady Shui. Not long after, there was even the sound of light snoring. Guaning had originally wanted to come over and ask about the plan. He wanted to see what Yang Chendong was going to do next. What did he need him to cooperate with? However, when he arrived at a place not far from the carriage, he heard the snoring sound. His face immediately turned bitter, but at the same time, he began to feel anger in his heart. He even had the impulse to roar and drag Yang Chendong out of the carriage. He wanted to interrogate him on what he was thinking and what he wanted to do. However, all of these thoughts were dispelled when he saw Beta Persei guarding the carriage on a horse. If he did it forcefully, he would be the one to suffer. Of course, he was not afraid of suffering. He was not even afraid of death. However, because he disturbed Yang Chendong's rest and was beaten up, it did not seem worth it. Forget it. When we get to Guangzhou, I'll see what you do. Thinking angrily in his heart, Guaning left to find paper and brush. He wanted to continue writing the battle report. He wanted to report all of Yang Chendong's inaction. He wanted the world to know how lazy this imperial envoy was. He wanted the world to know that the so-called god of war was not worthy of his name. Chapter 366. Under Guan Ying's internal discussion, the group headed straight from Jiangxi's Guangzhou government to Guangzhou's government. Just as Yang Chendong had said, because there were few people, the amount of supplies they brought was also small, so the marching speed of the troops was very fast. The distance of 800 li only became shorter and shorter as they walked. On the first day, the Black and White Army had marched 150 li. Of course, this speed was only possible because Yang Chendong had made preparations early on. There were more carriages with the army. Once a soldier was tired, they could take turns to rest on them. On the first day, they traveled 150 li. After 4 hours of rest, the army continued to move forward. The 300 Ming soldiers who were originally at the front of the army were also replaced. The elite 2nd Battalion of the Cold Front was in charge of the vanguard. Imperial Envoy, you can't go like this. If this continues, everyone will be exhausted before we reach Guangzhou's government. Lu Youfu panted heavily as he jogged to the side of Yang Chendong's carriage. His face was full of grievances. Guaning also followed over. This time he didn't say anything. With his physical strength he could still keep up at this speed. Most importantly, he had a warhorse, so it was much easier. Is it very tiring like this? Is it very fast? The curtain of the carriage was lifted. Yang Chendong's face was revealed. However, from the way he spoke, he seemed to be very shocked. Of course it's fast. Imperial Envoy, don't you know that our army's movement speed is usually around 60 li a day? Under the circumstances of rapid marching, 100 li is already the limit. If we travel 150 li a day, people will die. There will be big problems. His figure was already fat. After this torment, he was even more out of breath. Although Lu Youfu had a carriage to sit in, he was used to sitting in a sedan chair. It was very stable and stable, unlike this carriage which swayed back and forth for a day. It was enough to torment him to death. Yang Chendong listened to Lu Youfu's words. His face was full of disbelief. Sir Lu, didn't I already tell the army to bring less supplies? Traveling light should be faster, right? Yes, of course it's faster to travel light. However, it's still too much to travel 150 kilometers a day, Lu Youfu said resolutely. He didn't seem to have any intention of giving up. This was the first time he was so serious about something since he met Yang Chendong. When Yang Chendong saw this determined look, he knew that it would be very difficult to convince this person. So he simply gave up on the idea. Forget it. Since Lord Lu walks so slowly, I'll just stay behind. General Guan, you happen to be here as well. Let's see how many people in the army can't hold on any longer. Let them stay behind and slowly catch up. Of course, if anyone is willing to come with us, you can come with us. After saying this, Yang Chendong entered the carriage, leaving Lu Youfu and Guaning outside. What? What does this mean? Lu Youfu's face was filled with doubt, and even some resentment. He looked at Guaning as if he was complaining. At this moment, Guaning was really angry. If Yang Chendong didn't inform him of the division of the army, he could tolerate it. After all, he was an imperial envoy and the main general. He could tolerate it if the army didn't go to the rescue of the Guangzhou government. After all, he didn't have much power and official position. However, now that the army had set out, Yang Chendong still acted as if he didn't care about the soldiers at all. He couldn't tolerate it when he gave the order to abandon the hall. There was no need to tolerate it anymore. At this moment, Guaning was ready to flip out. However, before he could say anything, the the curtain of the carriage was opened again. Yang Chendong had changed into a camouflage military uniform and walked out. Yang Chendong, who was wearing a camouflage military uniform, easily made people's eyes light up. If it was said that wearing a green robe before could show off his scholarly temperament, now that he had changed into the uniform of a mercenary, he was really very heroic. The clothes seemed to be tailor-made for him. They fit him so well. A beret was worn diagonally on his head, making him look like a completely different person at this moment. The carriage will be left behind. I'll have to trouble Sir Lu to take care of it. I will personally follow the army. I don't ask for much. You can follow as fast as I can. How about it? Oh right, General Guan, you won't back out, right? The moment Yang Chendong landed on the ground in his shiny black combat boots, he said this with a calm attitude. Really? Guan Ying's eyes lit up when he heard that Yang Chendong was actually going to set out with the army. There's no joking in the army. Of course it's true. Haha, I'll go first. Follow me. Amidst the laughter, Yang Chendong had already started walking. Beside him, Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei and the others followed. Only Tai Chingy, a few female soldiers, and a squad of Lung Feng soldiers were left beside the carriage. The imperial envoy was going to follow the army and walk at the very front. The requirement was that the army's speed was the same as his. When this news spread, it immediately caused a commotion. Some of the Ming soldiers who were originally thinking about whether or not to stay in the rear were all energized. During the Ming Dynasty, the status of soldiers was not very high. In particular, soldiers were considered a lower class. However, compared to ordinary people, they had an advantage, which was that they could achieve military merits on the battlefield. Once they achieved military merits, they could be promoted from a soldier to an official and walk on the path of the sun. Therefore, once a war appeared and there was a chance to win, most soldiers would not think of giving up. They originally thought that with so few people and in such a state, would it be possible to win the battle after rushing to Guangzhou House? If they could not win, then it was better to stay in the rear. At least they could escape if the situation turned bad. However, when they heard that the imperial envoy was going to follow them, and that he was going to use his walking speed as a benchmark, everyone became excited. In their eyes, the so-called lord was mostly an embroidered pillow. If he wasn't born well, then he was well educated. Compared to marching and fighting, he was naturally not a match for them. Now this young imperial envoy actually wanted to lead an army. Who was he looking down on? This also stirred up the competitive spirit of the Ming soldiers. They decided to use reality to give this imperial envoy a slap in the face, and let him know that a true march was not something that could be measured by pointing and drawing on a map. The Ming soldiers became excited because of Yang Chendong's words. The 1,200 soldiers of the Lung Feng and auxiliary soldiers seemed to have been injected with chicken blood. All of them were glowing. All the soldiers who had truly joined the Lung Feng knew that the imperial envoy was the sixth young master. He was their idol. Just being able to fight side by side with the sixth young master in this battle was enough for them to brag about when they went back, much less being able to walk side by side with the sixth young master. How proud was that? All of them were endlessly excited and wanted to use this opportunity to perform well. Other than the officers, the normal soldiers did not know Yang Chendong's true identity. However, the higher-ups had sent word that as long as they followed this imperial envoy and performed well, they would have a higher chance of entering the Lung Feng. This was something they had dreamed of. Since they had the chance, who would be willing to fall behind? They were also holding back their energy and wanted to perform well. There were also some auxiliary soldiers who thought their strength was not bad and wanted to use this opportunity to wrestle with the Lung Feng to see who could walk better, who could walk faster, and who could last longer. They walked and competed. Under this kind of atmosphere, the soldiers became unprecedentedly excited. When Yang Chendong, who was wearing the same camouflage uniform as the Lung Feng, appeared in front of everyone and walked to the very front of the Lung Feng battalion, the entire troop was in an uproar. Guaning followed beside Yang Chendong to the very front of the troop. He also felt that there was something different about the atmosphere, but he only thought that everyone wanted to see the imperial envoy make a fool of himself, so he did not take it to heart. Instead, he seemed to kindly remind Yang Qindong. Lord Imperial Envoy, please do not try to show off. If your stamina is not good enough, remember to say so. The army is still waiting for your command. Don't worry, this Imperial Envoy will not fall. You, on the other hand, must follow closely behind me. If you are left behind, you can find a horse to ride. Don't disgrace the name of the Ministry of War. How could Yang Qindong not know that the other party was looking down on him? He was not afraid of anyone when it came to the art of talking. Not to mention, ever since he became Yang Qindong, he had trained a lot. Usually, when he was at the Yang Manor, he would secretly increase his own strength. Everyone only saw that the sixth young master had run the same distance as everyone else, but they did not know how many sandbags were tied under his legs. Not to mention, in his previous life, Yang Qindong had participated in more than 10 emergency training sessions. Not to mention his speed. Even his comrades could display the speed of a human body at critical times. Just like during the Wenchuan earthquake, his comrades had rushed to the earthquake zone at a speed of 200 kilometers a day. However, this was far from his limit. In short, Yang Qindong treated this march as a kind of warm-up training. He had no intention of showing off to others. It was with this thought that he relaxed his body and mind even more. When he rushed on the road, he took large strides and was extremely fast. The group began to move. Yang Qindong walked at the front of the group. Apart from a few cavalry scouts, there was no one else in front of them. There was no one blocking the front. Yang Qindong could display his speed and adjust his breathing at will. He could go fast or slow if he wanted to. It was very comfortable. Yang Qindong was like a pole, walking at the front of the team. At the beginning, he began to speed up again and again. His speed was indeed very fast. He was so fast that after only 3 li, he surprised Guanning. Although he was surprised, Guanning was not worried. Instead, he thought that Yang Qindong was trying to be brave. Even if he really wanted to rush, he should not continue at such a speed. Otherwise, later on, he would not be able to bear it. Even if he rushed to the battlefield in such a state, he would not be able to display the fighting strength he should have. Chapter 367. He wanted to remind Yang Qindong to pay attention to speed and frequency, but he considered that this was the best opportunity to slap him in the face. In the end, he swallowed the words he wanted to say. He wanted to see how long this person could pretend for. Contrary to what Guanning thought, Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, and the others who had been by Yang Qindong's side for many years were calm. If it had to be said, they were somewhat surprised. Their calmness came from their belief in the young master's personal strength. Their surprise came from feeling the self-confidence on the young master's body. They even had a feeling that the sixth young master's strength seemed to be even more unfathomable. Yang Qindong, who had just turned 21, was indeed in the best condition of his body. Compared to his previous life where he would inevitably suffer from hidden injuries after completing various missions, he was now completely unscathed. He only seemed to have an inexhaustible amount of strength. At this moment he only wanted to sweat to his heart's content. Only by doing so could he feel extremely happy and comfortable. Thus, in the eyes of others, Yang Qindong, who was showing off, was just doing normal training. This was just walking. There was no need to run. In his mind, this could not even be considered a rapid march. Even if he could sweat, it would only be a small amount. In order to achieve the goal of sweating a little more while walking, Yang Qindong began to accelerate a few times in succession. This was just to expel more of the impure air in his body. Even if he did not think it was a rapid march, this kind of speed was already very fast in the eyes of others. Only 4 hours had passed, but there were already some Ming soldiers who could not hold on and wanted to fall behind. If it were not for the fact that they wanted to see how long this young imperial envoy could hold on, and this curiosity was too great, there would probably have been more people who could not hold on. He really knows how to act, but he does have some strength. He actually managed to walk at a fast speed for 4 hours. Very good, I want to see how long you can last. Guanning thought to himself. Such a march was actually a challenge for him. In the past, when he was with the army, he always rode a horse. This time he was not used to using his feet. In addition, Yang Chendong did not give everyone a time to adapt. Instead, he sped up in the eyes of others. This made this brave general feel more or less exhausted. Fortunately, Guanning was young and had a good physique, so it was not impossible for him to hold on for 4 hours. Another 2 hours passed in the blink of an eye. During this process, the team stayed behind for 15 minutes to eat and replenish their nutrition. As the saying goes, one is not afraid of walking slowly, but one is afraid of stopping. Once they stopped, they would feel all sorts of discomfort all over their bodies. It was normal for their backs and legs to ache. There were even some people who could not continue once they stopped, and did not have enough time to rest. After 15 minutes of rest, more and more Ming soldiers fell out of the group. They could see that even if this young imperial envoy was showing off, his ability to hold on was not something they could compare to. This person did indeed have some skill. General Guanning also had the same thought. At this moment, he had to admit that this young loyal duke's physical strength was indeed very good. It was so good that even he had to admire it. However, if he admitted defeat like this, he could not. While eating, he was endlessly recovering his strength. He was also wondering whether Yang Chendong would continue to walk or whether he had finished showing off, and was preparing to get on the horse. He did not give Guanning much time to think. When Yang Chendong ate, his speed was indeed fast enough. If it was someone who did not know, they would not be able to link the way he ate just now to the imperial envoy. He ate much faster than many people. After drinking water, Yang Chendong closed his eyes and rested. This was a habit he had developed in the past. He could always seize every minute on the battlefield and rest at the first moment. The benefit of this was that under the same level of training, he would have more energy and stamina than others. Sometimes, it was this extra bit that allowed him to become the final victor. When the 15 minutes were up, Yang Chendong quickly opened his eyes and set out on the journey in an easygoing and energetic manner. Moving with him were still Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei, as well as even more Lung Feng and auxiliary soldiers. Compared to the Ming soldiers who were swaying left and right, unable to stand or sit properly, these 1,200 mercenaries still maintained their formation. Although some of them showed signs of fatigue, their energy was still quite good. Especially when the group was about to continue setting out and the commanders of the various battalions and platoons began to shout the order to gather. They moved even more quickly without any intention of dragging their feet. All of this, in Guanying's eyes, made his eyes sparkle. At this moment he more or less felt the strength of the mercenaries. The group continued to move forward. Another 2 hours, 4 hours, 5.5 hours passed. People who had fallen behind began to appear one after another. There were almost no Ming soldiers left, and even among the auxiliary soldiers of the mercenaries, there were people who had fallen behind. On the other hand, the elite Lung Feng battalion did not fall behind, and they were still full of energy. This was the difference between a regular army and an auxiliary soldier. To become a member of the Lung Feng battalion, not only did they have to have a strong political background, they also had excellent military qualities. Even after a few hours of continuous marching, they still held their heads high, looked straight ahead and strode forward. This march had indeed exceeded their usual training, but it was not as if this had never happened before. In order to train everyone, the Lung Feng battalion would often carry out such field training based on the basic idea of sweating more during normal times and bleeding less during wartime. In comparison, the current situation was nothing. Not to mention, their idol and spiritual pillar, the sixth young master, was walking at the front of the group. Even though the sky was completely dark, the figure holding the torch was still like a beacon, guiding everyone forward with large strides towards the bright and clear road that was filled with a beautiful future. Guanning was tired. Very, very tired. He made a rough calculation. Excluding the 15 minutes of rest while eating, the group had been marching for 20 hours. They had walked for a total of 250 miles, which was close to a day's time. At this time, the sky had begun to brighten, indicating the arrival of a new day. Exhaustion and tiredness made him want to fall to the ground and sleep, but an unyielding spirit persisted in his body. This was perhaps the only motivation for him to persist until now. Everyone rest. You have 15 minutes to eat and drink. If there is someone who needs to relieve himself, please hurry. We will continue in 2 hours. The voice of the commander of the 2nd Battalion of the Lungfeng Battalion, Chen Bo, finally rang out. With this shout, the group started to stop moving forward. Then hundreds of groups disbanded. But even so, there was still not much noise, and no one complained. Some people just went to solve their own problems. And some even took out pieces of meat patties that were warmed by their bodies and wolfed them down. The 1st Lungfeng Battalion and the auxiliary soldiers had brought a lot of meat patties like this before they set off. In the bags behind them, there was enough food for them to eat for a few days. After every rest, they would take out new meat patties from the bags and put them in their clothes. When they waited for the next time to eat, it would be warm again. The benefit of this was that it could save time to eat. Most of the time, if you could save a minute here, you would have a higher chance of winning on the battlefield. 3 large meat patties were also stuffed into Guan Ying's hands. He was indeed hungry and extremely sleepy, but for some reason, he did not immediately go to eat. Instead, he began to pant heavily. He knew clearly that after 2 hours, he would not have the strength to continue walking. How are you? Tired, right? At some unknown time, Yang Chendong's voice rang out by his ear. This made Guan Ying, who had just closed his eyes and almost fallen asleep, forcefully pull himself awake. Haha, that's right. I'm really tired. Lord Imperial Envoy, I really didn't think that you would be so powerful when you walk. I've indeed underestimated you before. I apologize to you. Guan Ying's words fell into Yang Chendong's ears and made him laugh out loud. General Guan, you have already done very well. At least compared to the other Ming soldiers. For you to be able to persist until now is already very impressive. I am also very impressed. Haha. Guan Ying, who gave a bitter smile, felt a sense of shame. He thought of how he had wanted to see the other party make a fool of himself a day ago. Only now did he know how arrogant he had been at that time. This also perfectly explained the phrase, there would always be someone stronger in the strong. In the future, he would not dare to underestimate anyone like this. Guan Ying even found it difficult to speak. Yang Chendong knew that the other party's physical strength had probably reached its limit, so he said with concern, you should stay and rest for a while. If possible, after you wake up, organize the remaining soldiers and have them make meat pies. In this kind of weather, the meat pies can't be stored for long. That's right, when you make the meat pies, you can't have too little meat. It has to be the kind of meat that has a bite and is very chewy. As for how much silver I spent, I'll give it all to you later. In short, we can't treat these soldiers unfairly. Are there any problems with completing this mission? No problem, Guan Ying said with a solemn vow and a tone of guarantee. He did not know that at this moment he was very much like Yang Chendong's subordinate. Good, then I'll have to trouble you. Rest well, haha. After Yang Chendong finished speaking, he patted Guan Ying's shoulder and stood up. It looked like he was going to walk around and take a look. This made Guan Ying couldn't help but ask, Sir, are you not tired? Chapter 368. How can they not be tired? But the soldiers are tired too. They need to be comforted. Sometimes, a general is more like a parent. You must know how to care for your soldiers. Only then will they work harder on the battlefield and bring you more glory. Yang Chendong turned around and said this casually. He then walked toward the other soldiers under the protection of Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, and the others. Guan Ying slowly closed his eyes as he recalled Yang Chendong's words. He really wanted to comprehend the deeper meaning of this sentence, but he was too sleepy at the moment. He did not have a good rest when he left Ganzhou Prefecture, and after nearly 20 hours of rapid marching, he was already sleepy. After closing his eyes for a few breaths, deep snoring sounds came from his mouth. Yang Chendong did not rest. He was tired, especially a little sleepy, but as a leader, he had to persevere and he could still persevere. Needless to say, he had already taken a nap when they were marching in the middle of the night. The only difference was that he was sleeping while standing up. This seemed a little inconceivable, but for those who had marched in a hurry, they could only rely on their comrades in the front and back. This kind of sleeping while marching was nothing out of the ordinary. As he walked among the various troops, he merely greeted the 4 companies of the Cold Vanguard Battalion, and it was considered that he had seen them. Yang Chendong was not worried at all about the Cold Vanguard Battalion, who had gone through many tests and used him as their spiritual support. Instead, he was more concerned about the 800 auxiliary battalions. When Yang Chendong arrived at the auxiliary battalions, he was quickly surrounded by platoon and company-level officers. "You guys have worked hard. You guys are also good. Your courage and stamina are not inferior to the Cold Vanguard battalions. This makes me very happy." Yang Chendong praised them as soon as they met. The officers smiled happily and contentedly at this compliment. Those who were able to become officers of the auxiliary troops were those who had strong political ideologies. In fact, many of them had come from the ranks of the Cold Vanguard. If they were trained as officers here, it wouldn't take long for them to return to the Cold Vanguard, and they would be heavily valued. Their future would also be bright. These people naturally knew Yang Chendong's true identity. When they saw the highest leader of Yangxia praising them, how could they not be happy? After a round of affirmation, Yang Chendong continued to state his expectations. "Tell the soldiers to hold on until we arrive at the Guangzhou prefecture. We'll take a good rest after we resolve the crisis there. By then, anyone who has an auxiliary soldier who performs meritorious deeds will be given priority to join the Cold Front." This was a promise. With this promise, the officers from the battalion to the company level became excited. Since they were able to become military officers, they naturally had the qualities and conditions to become leaders. In the Cold Front, the evaluation for officers was different from normal soldiers. The evaluation was based on how many merits they could lead the soldiers to, not how many merits they had. This was especially so for the officers of the auxiliary battalion. The proportion of their auxiliary soldiers who met the requirements to join the Cold Front, and the relative merits they would receive were also important aspects of the evaluation. Yang Chendong had said that those who made contributions this time would be given priority in entering the Cold Front. That was giving them a head start on their military merits. How could they not be excited? After a short conversation, Yang Chendong left and came under a tree. He leaned against the tree and closed his eyes, quickly recovering his mental and physical strength. However, the auxiliary battalion was already in an uproar. When the various battalion and company-level officers spread his words, many young men who had the ambition to join the Cold Front became excited. In Crimson City, if one were to ask who was the most popular person, it would undoubtedly be the Cold Warrior. Those who could join the Cold Front and become an official soldier could enjoy many benefits. Everyone was envious of them. Just the monthly salary alone was enough to feed a family of 5 and still be wealthy. Those who had a Cold Front soldier at home could enjoy all sorts of benefits even in business and farming, making others envious. Building an army with elite soldiers, waiting for soldiers with generous rewards, strict management of the army, and fair military merits were the standards that Yang Chendong proposed. Under such standards, as long as one had the ability and was able to perform well, one would not have to worry about being robbed of one's military merits. One would not have to worry about being buried, and one would not have to worry about the schemes of one's family or the future. One only needed to train hard and perform meritorious deeds on the battlefield. It was because of such treatment that everyone yearned to join the Cold Front. That was why Yang Chendong had opened his mouth. Everyone was extremely excited. This excitement lasted until the end of the 2-hour break. When the army once again advanced towards the prefecture of Guangzhou, many of the auxiliary soldiers began to speed up. They stuck to the back of the Lung Vanguard troops like sticky plasters, bringing immense pressure to the 4 companies of the Lung Vanguard that were advancing in front. "Young master, there are many good seedlings among the auxiliary soldiers." Tiger's Mane followed Yang Chendong's footsteps with large strides, occasionally turning back to speak excitedly. "It's good to have good seedlings. This is our hope." Yang Chendong nodded happily. A fresh army was the hope of an army's future. Only when the army continued to be younger and had a continuous influx of fresh blood could the army be invincible and win more battles in the future. Tiger's mane, it seems like these kids still have a lot of energy left. We need to increase the amount. Are you okay with that? Yang Chendong also noticed that the soldiers behind him were moving faster and faster. They even seemed to have the intention of catching up to him. Thus he was also interested and brought up the matter of increasing the amount. Come on, young master. Tiger's mane also feels that there is an endless amount of energy in his body. Huh, me too. Beta Persei chimed in from the side. In fact, this kind of marching did not have much of an advantage for someone of his stature. Because of his height and strength, it was more strenuous to walk. However, this disadvantage did not seem to be reflected on his body at all. Relying on his long legs and large strides, he actually kept half a step behind Yang Chendong without the slightest intention of falling behind. Seeing that the two beside him were so excited and unwilling to admit defeat, Yang Chendong laughed heartily. Then he glanced at the commander of the 2nd Cold Front Regiment, Luo Pe, who was 3 to 4 meters behind him. Commander Luo, do you want to increase the amount? 6th young master, I think it's okay. When Yang Chendong called out his name, Luo Pe was very excited. Although he was considered a high-ranking officer in Yang Xie's army, he did not have much time to interact with Yang Chendong. Now that he could be in close contact with him and have a better opportunity to perform, of course he would not let go of it. These kids usually have too much energy. Today is a good opportunity to see where their limits are. After receiving Luo Pe's affirmative answer, Yang Chendong laughed and said, Good, since that's the case, let's increase the amount. Let's go. Then the speed of the troops began to increase. From afar, the troops were like a gust of wind, blowing across the southern land. Below Guangzhou City, today was the 8th day of the siege. As the capital of Guangdong, the importance of Guangzhou City was self-evident. Once they conquered this place, they could announce the fact that Guangdong had fallen to the outside world. Only then would they be able to better coordinate with King Minzhuang in Yunnan and achieve his political goals. Huang Yuliang was able to make such a name for himself and have so many subordinates a year after his father and brother passed away. It was all thanks to the changes in the situation. If it was not for King Minzhuang, Zhu Huixin, causing trouble in Yunnan, even if they did not die, they would only be able to wander around like stray dogs. Huang Yuliang knew the importance of having an ally. Even if he knew that conquering Guangzhou City would likely lead to the southern Ming army surrounding him, he had no choice but to do so. Moreover, when that time came, it was uncertain whether the southern Ming army would still have the strength to deal with him. In the end, conquering Guangzhou City was the most important problem at hand. Once he conquered this place, the other 3 armies under his command would be able to coordinate with each other. At that time, he would truly have the power. However, such an important place had not been conquered even after 8 days of siege. 8 days of siege had far exceeded the initial military plan. Due to the lack of success, the morale of the Yellow Bandit army had been severely affected. As a mixed army that did not have much training and was mostly made up of rebellious civilians, they had a fatal characteristic, which was the problem of morale. If they won the battle, everything would be fine. Especially when the battle went smoothly, they would often be able to display more strength than before. However, at the same time, once the battle became a stalemate, the mixed army would be anxious and each of them would have their own plans. Just like now, when the order was given, the leaders of the so-called rebel army were not as obedient as they were a few days ago. Each of them seemed to be conserving their strength. Regarding this situation, Huang Yuliang even killed a small leader who had a few hundred subordinates who refused to advance, scaring some of them into putting in more effort. However, in front of the tall city walls and the Ming army of Guangzhou City that was desperately defending, their progress was still slow. What is going on? Can we take down Guangzhou City? What is Ma Wei trying to do? If he continues to defend like this, he will not have enough soldiers sooner or later. Does he want to be a general without an army? In the tent, Huang Yuliang was furious. He had a frightening look on his face as he reprimanded the subordinates beside him. Huang Yuliang was furious, and the battle was not going smoothly. The other generals naturally lowered their heads and did not say anything. However, his trusted general, Geng Jun, who was the head of the 4 heavenly kings under Huang Yuliang, stood out. Young master, this Ma Wei is unmoved by force or persuasion. I think he is waiting for reinforcements. We only need to dispel his worries, and Guangzhou City will fall without a fight. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.